Chapter 561. A Blue Rose Blooms. 3. The musicians continued playing, and I knew what was expected of me next. It was time to dance with the other 3 princesses, each dance carrying its own significance and sending its own message to the assembled guests. Cecilia approached first, her red eyes bright with anticipation. "My turn?" she asked with characteristic directness. "It would be my pleasure, Your Highness," I replied formally, offering my arm. Dancing with Cecilia was like partnering with controlled fire. Her movements were precise and powerful, reflecting the strength that had made her such a formidable ally. Her golden hair seemed to glow under the lights, and her red eyes held mine with an intensity that spoke of deep affection tempered by political awareness. "You look happy tonight," she observed as we moved through the steps of a more contemporary dance. "I am happy," I replied honestly. "All of us together like this, celebrating Rose's birthday. It feels right." "It does," she agreed, "though I suspect the real celebration will come later." Her meaningful glance toward Rose made her implications clear, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "Cecilia," I warned, though my tone was more amused than disapproving. "What?" "I'm simply observing that 18 is a very significant birthday," she said with mock innocence, "especially when one has been waiting so patiently." When our dance ended, she squeezed my hand gently before releasing me. "Take care of her tonight, Arthur. She's been looking forward to this for a very long time." Rachel was next, gliding toward us with the fluid grace that characterized all her movements. Her deep blue eyes were warm with affection as I took her in my arms for what turned out to be a more traditional waltz. "You're quite the popular dance partner tonight," she observed with gentle teasing. "I'm simply fulfilling my social obligations," I replied, spinning her gracefully under my arm. "Is that what we are? Social obligations?" Her tone was light, but I caught the underlying question. "You know better than that," I said seriously, pulling her closer as we moved through a particularly complex sequence of steps. "You're all far more than that. We're what?" she prompted when I hesitated. "You're my heart," I said simply. "All of you, in different ways but completely." Her smile was radiant. That's exactly what I needed to hear. As our dance concluded, she stood on her tiptoes to press a brief, chaste kiss to my cheek. "Don't let Rose wait too long tonight," she whispered. "Some things are worth the anticipation, but only to a point." Finally, Serafina approached, her silver hair seeming to shimmer with each step. Her ice-blue eyes held mine with characteristic intensity as I offered my hand. Dancing with Serafina was like partnering with winter itself, beautiful, powerful, and carrying an otherworldly grace that never failed to captivate me. Her movements had a flowing quality that made it seem as though she were floating rather than walking. "This has been a lovely evening," she said as we moved together across the floor. "It has," I agreed, "though I suspect it's far from over." "Indeed." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "Arthur, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done. Not just for me, but for all of us. You've given us something precious." "What's that?" "The ability to love without reservation," she replied. "To trust in something beautiful without fear that it will be taken away." Her words carried weight that went beyond simple gratitude, touching on the deeper transformations we had all undergone during our time together. "You've given me just as much," I said honestly. "All of you have." As the music ended and I escorted Serafina back to the edge of the dance floor, I noticed that the crowd was beginning to thin. Some guests were making their polite farewells, while others had gathered in small groups for quiet conversation. The formal portion of the evening was clearly drawing to a close. I found Rose speaking with an elderly couple who were family friends, her manner gracious and attentive as they shared stories about her childhood. When she saw me approaching, she politely concluded the conversation and turned toward me with obvious anticipation. "How are you feeling?" I asked quietly, noting the way her eyes sparkled with excitement and perhaps a touch of nervousness. "Perfect," she replied without hesitation. "This has been everything I hoped it would be."
I'm Glo.
I glanced around the room, noting that her father was engaged in conversation with several political allies near the refreshment table. Would you like to step outside for some fresh air? It's been quite warm in here. Her smile was answer enough. We made our way through the remaining guests, accepting final congratulations and birthday wishes, before stepping out onto the estate's main terrace. The night air was crisp and clear, filled with the scent of the garden's prize-winning roses and the subtle magical energies that always seemed to hover around the Springshaper estate. "Thank you," Rose said softly as we walked toward the terrace's edge, where we could look out over the moonlit gardens. "For what?" "For making tonight perfect. For dancing with me first. For treating this like the important milestone it is. For—" She paused, seeming to search for words. "For making me feel like I'm worth celebrating." I stopped walking and turned to face her fully, my hands finding hers in the moonlight. "Rose, you are absolutely worth celebrating. Not because of your birthday, not because you're 18 now, but because of who you are. The woman you've become. I couldn't have become her without you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You showed me that I could be more than just my mother's daughter, more than the shame I carried for so long. You always had that strength inside you," I corrected gently. "I just helped you see it." She looked up at me, her brown eyes luminous in the moonlight, and I saw in them the same love and trust that had been growing between us for months. But now there was something else, a mature certainty that hadn't been there before. "Arthur," she said quietly, "I know we've been waiting, all of us, until tonight, and I know that what happens next changes everything. Are you ready for that?" I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. "I've been ready for months," she replied with quiet conviction. "The only question is whether you are." Looking at her, this remarkable young woman who had overcome so much, who had grown from uncertainty into confidence, who loved me with such complete trust, I knew there was only one answer I could give. "I'm ready," I said simply. Her smile was brilliant enough to rival the moon itself. "Then let's go inside," she said, her hand finding mine with perfect certainty. As we walked back toward the estate, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The careful patience, the growing trust, the deep affection that had developed between not just Rose and me, but all of us together. Tonight marked more than just Rose's 18th birthday. It marked the true beginning of something that would define the rest of our lives. The formal celebration was ending, but the real celebration was just about to begin. Chapter 562. A Blue Rose Blooms. 4. I noticed Rose and Arthur slipping away from the hall together, their hands interlocked with the kind of natural intimacy that spoke of deep understanding and shared anticipation. The sight brought a complex smile to my face, equal parts joy, melancholy, and something approaching relief. It did hurt, admittedly, to see my daughter all grown up now, stepping away from the protective circle I had maintained around her for 18 years. But she was walking into the hands of a very capable man, someone who had already proven his worth in ways that went far beyond conventional measures. Guild master of a gold-ranked guild in the Slatemark Empire, considered to be the future paragon alongside Lucifer Windward, already at peak integration rank with the wall to ascendant status clearly within his reach. But most importantly, and most disturbingly, a nightingale. I felt the weight of that realization settle in my chest like a stone as I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry despite the evening's wine. To think that Rose would gain the affection of a nightingale, it was simultaneously the greatest blessing and the most terrifying prospect I could imagine for her future. It was more frightening, in many ways, than if she had been courting someone from one of the 7 superpowers. At least with the superpowers, their influence and capabilities were known quantities, documented and understood within the bounds of conventional political power. The Nightingales operated by entirely different rules. Now that I had achieved the rank of Marquis, I was privy to information that had been carefully withheld from lesser nobles. I understood, finally, the true meaning behind that family name and why it carried such weight in the highest circles of power. The facts about the Nightingale lineage were secrets known only to the superpowers themselves, and even then only to their most trusted leadership. Of course, I thought with grim humor. No ordinary man would dare to simultaneously court 3 princesses and the daughter of a marquis. Only someone with that kind of backing would have the audacity and the protection to attempt such an arrangement. But the fact that Arthur was a nightingale made it all make sense. The rapid rise of his guild, the unprecedented partnerships he had secured, the way powerful figures seemed to defer to someone barely out of his teenage years. It all fell into place once you understood the true scope of what that family represented. As I watched the last of the evening's guests make their polite farewells, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. Rose's childhood, overshadowed by secrets I hadn't understood at the time. The gradual revelation of truths that had shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. And now, this new chapter beginning with a young man whose family name carried implications I was only beginning to grasp. I thought about Evelyn. Even now, years after learning the truth, her name still carried the power to tighten something in my chest. Not with love, that emotion had died a brutal death the day I discovered who she really was, but with the complex mixture of regret, anger, and profound sadness that came with understanding how completely I had been deceived. I had loved her once. Loved her with the kind of desperate, all-consuming passion that young men mistake for destiny. Evelyn had been breathtakingly beautiful, with her dark red hair that seemed to hold fire in its depths and jade-green eyes that could make me forget everything else in the world. She had been intelligent, charming, mysterious in ways that had only made her more alluring. When she had chosen me, I had felt like the luckiest man alive. I had believed, with the naive certainty of youth, that we were meant to be together, that our love story would be one for the ages. Our wedding had been a grand affair, celebrated throughout the noble circles as a romantic triumph. Our early years of marriage had been blissful, filled with the kind of happiness that made me believe in fairy tales. And when Rose was born, tiny and perfect with my auburn hair and brown eyes, I had thought my life was complete. For years, I had been content in that illusion. Evelyn had been an attentive wife, a caring mother, a gracious hostess who elevated our family's social standing through her charm and intelligence. She had supported my political ambitions, offered wise counsel during difficult decisions, and seemed genuinely invested in our family's future. I should have recognized the signs. The way she sometimes disappeared for days at a time, claiming to visit family or attend social obligations that I was somehow never invited to join. The letters that arrived through private channels, written in codes I didn't recognize. The subtle questions she would ask about magical defenses, political alliances, information that seemed slightly outside the bounds of normal curiosity. But I had been blinded by love, and later by habit and comfort. I had constructed explanations for everything that seemed unusual, dismissing my occasional doubts as paranoia or jealousy. The truth, when it finally emerged, had been devastating beyond anything I could have imagined. Evelyn wasn't just connected to the Order of the Fallen Flame. She was their pope, the mysterious, terrifying figure who had orchestrated attacks against humanity, who had commanded the loyalty of some of our most dangerous enemies, who had been responsible for countless deaths and immeasurable suffering. And I had shared a bed with her, had trusted her with my deepest secrets, my political connections, my family's vulnerabilities, had given her a child. The revelation had nearly destroyed me. Not just the betrayal, though that had been crushing enough, but the understanding of how thoroughly I had been used. Our entire relationship had been a carefully constructed lie, designed to place her in a position where she could gather intelligence, influence political decisions, and most importantly, produce an heir with specific magical capabilities. Rose hadn't been conceived out of love, as I had always believed. She had been planned, calculated, engineered for a purpose that still made my blood run cold when I considered it too closely. Evelyn had needed a child with a stronger gift than her own, someone who could serve as a weapon in whatever dark plans she had been orchestrating. My magical abilities, while respectable, weren't extraordinary. But the combination of my bloodline with hers had produced something far more powerful than either of us possessed individually. Rose's gift was remarkable, a level of magical potential that drew attention from the highest circles of power. If Evelyn had succeeded in her plans, if she had been able to corrupt our daughter's development, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Thank every benevolent force in the universe that Arthur had entered Rose's life when he did. I had watched my daughter struggle for years with the weight of her heritage, the shame of being connected to humanity's greatest enemy, the fear that she might somehow carry her mother's evil within her. She had withdrawn into herself, become quiet and uncertain, afraid to trust in her own worth or the possibility of genuine affection from others. Arthur had changed all of that, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through patient consistency. He had seen Rose not as the Pope's daughter or as a political complication, but simply as herself. He had helped her understand that she was not defined by her mother's choices, that she could choose her own path regardless of the circumstances of her birth. Under his influence, Rose had blossomed into the confident, joyful young woman who had hosted tonight's celebration with such grace. She had learned to trust in her own worth, to believe that she deserved love and happiness, to see herself as more than just the product of a calculated deception. And now she was 18, legally an adult, free to make her own choices about her future. Free to love and be loved without the artificial constraints that had shaped her childhood. The fact that she had chosen Arthur, or perhaps more accurately, that they had chosen each other, brought me a peace I hadn't expected to feel. Yes, the Nightingale connection was intimidating, potentially dangerous in ways I couldn't fully predict. But it also meant that Rose would have protection, resources, and opportunities that I could never have provided for her on my own. More than that, I had seen how Arthur looked at her. Not with the calculating interest of someone seeking political advantage, not with the casual affection of a young man enjoying temporary pleasure, but with the kind of deep, genuine love that recognized her true worth. He saw in Rose what I had always hoped someone would see. Not the daughter of a traitor, not a political liability, not a source of shame or complication, but a remarkable young woman worthy of devotion and respect. Tonight marked the beginning of a new chapter in Rose's life, one where she would be free to explore the full scope of her potential without the shadow of her mother's legacy hanging over her. She would face new challenges, certainly, and the complexities of her relationship with Arthur and the other three remarkable young women would require navigation of political and personal waters I could barely imagine. But she would face those challenges as herself, confident in her own worth and secure in the knowledge that she was loved for exactly who she was. As I made my way through the empty hall, directing the staff in their cleanup efforts and ensuring that the estate returned to its normal state of quiet elegance, I found myself thinking about the future with something approaching optimism for the first time in years. Rose was no longer my little girl, dependent on my protection and guidance. She was a woman now, ready to make her own choices and face the consequences of those decisions with courage and wisdom I had helped nurture but could no longer directly provide. And that, I realized, was all any father could truly hope for his daughter. Chapter 565. A Blue Rose Blooms. 7. Consciousness returned to me slowly, like surfacing from the depths of the most peaceful dream I'd ever experienced. The first thing I became aware of was warmth. Not just the comfortable temperature of Rose's room, but the specific, intimate warmth of another person pressed against my side. Rose. The memories of the previous night flooded back in a rush of emotion and sensation that made my heart race all over again. Her 18th birthday, the celebration, the moment we had finally been alone together, and everything that had followed. The way she had looked at me with such trust and love, the softness of her skin, the whispered words of devotion that had made the entire world fade away until there was nothing but us. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the tall windows of her bedroom. Afternoon sunlight. A glance at the digital clock on her nightstand confirmed what I suspected. It was past 1 in the afternoon. We had slept far later than either of us typically would, but given the circumstances, it was hardly surprising. Rose was curled against my side, her auburn hair spread across my chest like silk, her face peaceful in sleep. She looked younger somehow in the gentle light, more vulnerable, and I felt a surge of protective tenderness that was even stronger than what I'd felt before last night. Everything had changed between us. Not just physically, though that transformation was significant enough, but emotionally as well. The careful boundaries we'd maintained, the patient restraint that had characterized our relationship for months. All of it had been swept away in favor of something deeper, more complete. As if sensing my gaze, Rose's brown eyes fluttered open, immediately finding mine with the kind of automatic focus that spoke of deep connection. A slow, content smile spread across her face. "Good morning," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep and carrying undertones that sent pleasant shivers down my spine. "Good afternoon, more like," I replied, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "We've slept away half the day." She hummed contentedly, stretching against me in a way that was entirely too distracting. I wonder why that might be. Her tone was innocent enough, but the mischievous glint in her brown eyes suggested she was perfectly aware of the effect she was having on me. "Rose," I warned, though my voice lacked any real authority. "What?" she asked with mock innocence, propping herself up on one elbow to look at me properly. "I'm simply observing that someone seemed particularly energetic last night." Heat rose to my cheeks as I recalled just how enthusiastic I had been. "You weren't exactly passive yourself," I pointed out in my defense. Her laugh was like music, bright and joyful in a way that made my chest tight with affection. "No, I suppose I wasn't." She traced patterns on my chest with one finger, her touch light but possessive. "Though I have to say, your stamina is quite impressive." "I wasn't expecting." "Rose?" I interrupted, my voice strangled as her implications became clear. "What? I'm giving you a compliment." Her grin was absolutely wicked. "Multiple compliments, actually. You're very thorough." I covered my face with my hands, torn between embarrassment and the urge to pull her closer and show her exactly how thorough I could be all over again. "You're going to be the death of me." "What a way to go, though," she said cheerfully, pressing a kiss to my jaw before sitting up properly. "But as much as I'd like to stay in bed all day, I suspect my father will want to see us eventually. And we should probably eat something substantial." The mention of the Marquis made me suddenly very aware of our current situation. I was in his daughter's bed, in his house, after spending the night doing things that would probably make him reach for his sword if he thought about them too closely. "Do you think he knows?" I asked, suddenly concerned about the potential political ramifications of our night together. Rose gave me a look that suggested I might be slightly dim. "Arthur, you're a very intelligent man, but sometimes you're remarkably naive about certain things. Of course he knows. The entire point of last night was that I'm 18 now. What exactly did you think was going to happen?" She had a point, of course. The celebration, the significance of her birthday, the way her father had spoken to me. It had all been building toward this moment. I had been so focused on Rose, so caught up in my own emotions and the importance of the milestone for our relationship, that I hadn't fully processed the broader implications. "He's not going to challenge me to a duel, is he?" I asked, only half joking. "Only if you hurt me," Rose replied seriously. "But since I'm currently very, very satisfied with how things went, I think you're safe." The way she said satisfied made me want to pull her back down into my arms. But she was already moving toward her wardrobe, apparently deciding that our lazy morning was officially over. "We should get dressed," she said, pulling out clothes with the kind of casual comfort that suggested she wasn't at all bothered by our current state of undress. "Father will want to have lunch with us, and it would be rude to keep him waiting much longer." I watched her move around the room, marveling at the easy confidence she displayed. This was a side of Rose I'd never seen before, comfortable in her own skin, secure in her choices, radiating a kind of satisfied contentment that transformed her entire bearing. "You're different," I observed as I reluctantly left the warmth of her bed to retrieve my own scattered clothes. "Different how?" she asked, pulling on a casual blouse that complemented her coloring perfectly. "More confident. More settled, I suppose." I struggled to find the right words. "Like you've finally become completely yourself." Her smile was radiant. "That's exactly how I feel. Like I've been waiting my entire life to become this person, and now I finally have." As we finished getting dressed, a process that took longer than it should have due to frequent interruptions for kisses and whispered endearments, I found myself thinking about the transformation in our relationship. Not just the physical intimacy, though that had been extraordinary, but the emotional shift that had accompanied it. There was a new ease between us, a comfortable intimacy that went beyond anything we'd shared before. The careful politeness that had marked even our most private moments was gone, replaced by something more natural, more genuine. "Ready?" Rose asked, checking her appearance in the mirror one final time. "As ready as I'll ever be for lunch with your father after." I gestured vaguely between us. "After making his daughter very happy?" she supplied helpfully. "I think he'll be pleased, actually. He's been worried about my happiness for years." We made our way through the estate's corridors, our hands naturally finding each other as we walked. I was struck by how normal it felt, how right. The nervous anticipation I'd expected to feel was nowhere to be found, replaced instead by a deep sense of contentment and belonging. The marquee was waiting for us in the estate's informal dining room, a comfortable space that overlooked the gardens where the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and green. He looked up as we entered, and I was relieved to see warmth rather than hostility in his brown eyes. "Good afternoon," he said with mild amusement. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd sleep the entire day away." "Sorry, father," Rose said, moving to kiss his cheek with the kind of easy affection that spoke of a strong relationship. "We were tired." The slight emphasis she placed on the word made me flush again, and I caught the Marquis's knowing look. But rather than the anger or disapproval I'd feared, his expression held something that looked remarkably like satisfaction. "I'm sure you were," he replied dryly. "Well, you're here now. Lunch is ready whenever you are." As we settled around the table and began what turned out to be one of the most comfortable meals I'd ever shared, I found myself thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in the span of a single night. Not just my relationship with Rose, though that transformation was profound, but my entire understanding of what happiness could look like. The careful patience that had defined our courtship had given way to something more immediate, more real. And as I watched Rose laugh at something her father said, her face bright with joy and contentment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Last night had been perfect, but this easy intimacy, this comfortable belonging, this was what I'd been waiting for without even knowing it. Chapter 566. Master 1. The partnership between the Tower of Magic, the Creighton family, and Ouroboros regarding Aetheryte mining had reached its final planning stages. We had collectively decided to send a specialized team to the Lunar Research Station in December to begin extraction operations. For now, the focus was on developing the required equipment, specialized mining tools that could function in the moon's unique magical environment, transport containers that could preserve Aetheryte's properties during the journey back to Earth, and safety protocols for working with a substance whose full capabilities we were still discovering. Mythos Academy was preparing to reopen for the new term as well, which meant I was trying to wrap up as much of my administrative work as possible before returning to my final year. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was rushing to complete guild business so I could attend classes that had already become largely irrelevant to my actual responsibilities. Jean was currently in the West, handling some delicate negotiations with the regional powers there, but he was performing exactly as I had expected, efficiently, diplomatically, and with the kind of strategic thinking that made him invaluable. Elias had proven remarkably helpful in managing the endless stream of paperwork that came with operating a gold-rank guild, his organizational skills and attention to detail allowing me to focus on the larger strategic decisions. I had chosen to give Callie a well-deserved break from her usual intelligence-gathering duties. After months of constant work coordinating information networks and managing our contacts across multiple continents, my helper needed some time to rest and recharge. Overall, things were progressing smoothly. The Aetheryte project was on schedule, guild operations were running efficiently, and the various political alliances I had been cultivating were proving their worth. But of course, my life couldn't remain straightforward for long. "Thank God you finally agree," Luna's voice echoed in my mind with obvious relief. "Did you think I wouldn't?" I asked, genuinely curious about her apparent surprise. "Then why are you doing it?" she urged, her tone carrying a mixture of exasperation and amusement. "I can't say no to her," I protested weakly, knowing even as I said it how inadequate the explanation sounded. Why was Luna being so insistent about this? The answer was currently sitting on the floor beside my desk, her violet hair catching the afternoon light streaming through my office windows. Reika had positioned herself with her head resting in my lap, and I found myself gently stroking her hair in what had somehow become a familiar gesture over the past few weeks. And no, despite how it might appear to an outside observer, this was not what it looked like. "Oh, please," Luna snorted in my mind, her disbelief practically radiating through our mental connection. The situation had developed gradually, so naturally that I hadn't really noticed when it became routine. It had started innocently enough. Reika would come to my office to deliver reports or discuss training schedules, and she would sit on the floor beside my chair rather than taking one of the available seats. Initially, I had assumed it was simply her way of showing respect, a holdover from her previous circumstances that would fade as she became more comfortable with her position in the guild. But instead of evolving toward more conventional interactions, our dynamic had somehow moved in the opposite direction. The floor sitting had progressed to her occasionally resting her head against my leg while we talked, and from there to the current arrangement where she would curl up beside my desk like a content cat while I worked. The strangest part was how natural it felt. Reika radiated a sense of peace and happiness during these moments that was impossible to ignore. Her violet eyes, with their distinctive flower-shaped patterns, would practically glow with contentment, and she would hum softly to herself as I absently ran my fingers through her hair. "Master," she said softly, her voice carrying that particular tone of satisfaction that had become so familiar. "Are you sure you don't need anything else? I'm happy to serve you in any way you might require." The way she said "any way" carried implications that made heat rise to my cheeks, though her expression remained perfectly innocent. This was another aspect of our evolving dynamic that I wasn't entirely sure how to handle. Reika's devotion had taken on qualities that went well beyond simple loyalty or gratitude. "I'm fine, Reika," I replied gently, though I didn't stop the gentle stroking motion that seemed to bring her such comfort. "Just finishing up these logistics reports for the Etherite project." "The lunar mining operation," she said with obvious interest. "Will you be leading the expedition personally?" "Probably not the initial survey mission," I admitted, "though I'll definitely be involved in the larger extraction operations once we've established proper procedures." She smiled at that non-answer, seeming satisfied simply to have raised the possibility. "Of course, Master. I trust your judgment completely." The title still made me slightly uncomfortable, though I had to admit that Reika's happiness when using it made it difficult to discourage. She had insisted on the formal address from the moment she had officially entered my service, claiming it helped her maintain the proper mindset for her role. Who was I to argue with something that clearly brought her such satisfaction? "You could start by not enabling whatever this is," Luna suggested dryly. "She's not hurting anyone," I replied defensively, "and she seems genuinely happy." "That's exactly the problem," Luna shot back. "She's too happy. This isn't normal, Arthur." I had to concede that Luna had a point. Reika's contentment during these moments was almost transcendent, as if the simple act of serving me in this capacity fulfilled some deep psychological need. It was flattering, certainly, but also somewhat concerning in its intensity. "Master," Reika said suddenly, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course," I replied, though Luna's immediate surge of alarm through our mental link made me wonder if I should have been more cautious. "Do you ever regret taking me in? Accepting my service?" Her violet eyes searched my face with an intensity that suggested this question had been weighing on her mind for some time. The vulnerability in her voice made my chest tighten with protective instincts. "Never," I said firmly. "You've been invaluable to the guild, Reika. More than that, you've become—" I paused, searching for the right words. "You've become someone I care about deeply. Your happiness matters to me." The smile that spread across her face was radiant enough to rival the sun. "Thank you, Master. Knowing that makes everything worthwhile." She settled back into her previous position, humming that soft, contented tune as I returned to my paperwork. The sound was oddly soothing, and I found myself falling back into the rhythm of gentle stroking that seemed to bring her such peace. We remained like that for perhaps 20 minutes, the afternoon light gradually shifting as the sun moved across the sky. I was making good progress on the logistics reports when the office door suddenly opened without warning. Callie stepped through the doorway, clearly intending to discuss something important, but stopped dead when she took in the scene before her. Her eyes widened as she processed the sight of Rekha curled up beside my chair with her head in my lap, my hand tangled in her violet hair, both of us looking perfectly comfortable with the arrangement. For a moment, absolute silence filled the room. Callie's expression cycled through surprise, understanding, and what might have been amusement before settling on carefully neutral professionalism. "Oh," she said quietly, raising one hand to cover her mouth. "I apologize for disturbing you both. I should have knocked." "Callie, wait," I started to say, but she was already backing toward the door. "It's not urgent," she said quickly, though her eyes held a gleam that suggested she was filing this information away for future reference. "We can discuss it later, much later, when you're less occupied." She disappeared through the doorway with remarkable speed, leaving Rekha and me alone once again. I could hear her footsteps retreating down the corridor, and I had the distinct impression that this little scene would be the subject of considerable speculation among the guild's staff. "That was embarrassing," I muttered, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. Rekha, however, seemed entirely unbothered by the interruption. "Why?" she asked innocently. "We weren't doing anything inappropriate. I was simply resting while you worked."
Define inappropriate. Luna commented sarcastically.
"It's just..." I struggled to articulate why the situation felt complicated. "People might get the wrong impression." "What impression would that be?" Rekha asked, tilting her head to look at me again. "That I serve you faithfully? That you treat me with kindness? That we're comfortable with each other?" When she put it like that, it did sound fairly innocent. But something about the way she said, "serve you faithfully," carried undertones that definitely weren't innocent, and the contentment in her violet eyes suggested depths of devotion that went well beyond professional loyalty. "Never mind," I said finally, returning to my paperwork. "You're probably right." She smiled at that, settling back into her position with obvious satisfaction. "I usually am, Master." Chapter 567. Master. 2. I arrived at the Ouroboros Guild headquarters with my usual efficiency, my heels clicking against the polished floors as I made my way through the familiar corridors. After weeks of intensive intelligence gathering and coordination work, Arthur had finally given me some time off, something I had initially protested but had come to appreciate. The brief respite had allowed me to catch up on personal matters and recharge my mental batteries. But now I was ready to dive back into the complex web of information management that kept our operations running smoothly. The guild building was bustling with activity, as usual. Staff members moved purposefully through the halls, coordinating various projects and maintaining the intricate systems that supported our gold rank status. The Etherite mining project had everyone energized. The potential applications were staggering, and being part of such a groundbreaking venture had elevated morale throughout the organization. As I approached Arthur's office, I noticed Elias at his desk in the outer administrative area, his phone pressed to his ear with a somewhat urgent expression on his face. He looked up as I passed, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized me. "Callie, wait," he started to say, raising his free hand in what appeared to be a gesture meant to stop me. But I was already in motion, my hand on the door handle to Arthur's private office. I had been coming and going from this space for months without ceremony, and the habit of simply entering when I needed to discuss important matters was deeply ingrained. Arthur had never minded my direct approach before. If anything, he seemed to prefer the efficiency of skipping formal announcements when we had guild business to discuss. "I need to speak with Arthur about intelligence networks," I called back to Elias without slowing down. "It won't take long." I turned the handle and stepped through the doorway, already formulating the briefing I needed to deliver about some concerning developments in the political landscape. The words died on my lips as I took in the scene before me. Arthur was seated at his desk, apparently working through some paperwork, but that wasn't what caused my brain to momentarily short-circuit. It was Rekha, beautiful, devoted Reika with her distinctive violet hair and those mesmerizing violet eyes, who was positioned on the floor beside his chair, her head resting comfortably in his lap while his hand moved through her hair in gentle, rhythmic strokes. For a moment, absolute silence filled the room. My mind raced through possible explanations for what I was witnessing, each one more unlikely than the last. They both looked completely comfortable with the arrangement, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Arthur's expression showed mild embarrassment at being discovered, but there was also something protective in the way his hand stilled in Reika's hair. As for Reika herself, she looked utterly content, practically glowing with satisfaction. "Oh," I managed to say, raising one hand to cover my mouth in an automatic gesture of surprise. "I apologize for disturbing you both. I should have knocked." Arthur's face was flushing a becoming shade of pink. "Callie, wait," he started to protest, but I was already backing toward the door. "It's not urgent," I said quickly, though my investigative mind was already filing away every detail of what I had just witnessed. "We can discuss it later, much later, when you're less occupied." I retreated from the office with as much dignity as I could muster, closing the door behind me and leaving them to whatever unconventional arrangement they had developed. As I stood in the corridor, processing what I had just seen, I became aware of Elias watching me with a knowing expression. "I tried to warn you," he said simply, hanging up his phone. "He's been busy with guild matters." "Guild matters," I repeated slowly. "Is that what we're calling it?" Elias shrugged with the diplomatic neutrality that made him so effective in his administrative role. "It's not my place to question the guild master's methods, as long as they don't interfere with operations." I found myself thinking about what I knew of Reika's feelings for Arthur. It hadn't exactly been a secret among those of us who worked closely with her. The way she looked at him, the devotion in her voice when she spoke about him, the obvious adoration that colored every interaction. Anyone with eyes could see that she was completely enamored with our guild master. And honestly, I was happy for her. Reika had been through so much, had suffered in ways that few people could truly understand. If Arthur's attention brought her joy and comfort, who was I to judge the form that happiness took? She deserved every bit of love and care she could find. But I had to admit, the scene I had just witnessed was unexpected. Even knowing about Reika's feelings, I hadn't anticipated this particular development in their relationship. Then again, perhaps I shouldn't have been so surprised. Arthur had an almost supernatural ability to attract the affections of remarkable women. Rachel Creighton, Cecilia Slatemark, Seraphina Zenith, Rose Springshaper, 4 of the most extraordinary young women of our generation, all completely devoted to him. And now Reika, with her unique beauty and fierce loyalty, had apparently found her own place in that constellation of affection. 5 wonderful women, each remarkable in her own way, all drawn to the same enigmatic young man. It was honestly impressive in a way that defied conventional understanding. Whatever the explanation, I couldn't deny the pattern. Arthur was a magnet for exceptional women, and they all seemed to find ways to coexist rather than compete. It was politically advantageous, strategically sound, and apparently emotionally fulfilling for everyone involved. I made my way to the guild's common area, settling into one of the comfortable chairs with a cup of tea while I waited for Arthur and Reika to conclude whatever they were doing. The administrative wing was quieter now, with most of the staff either out on assignments or focused on their various projects. About 20 minutes later, I heard the soft sound of Arthur's office door opening. Reika emerged first, her violet hair slightly mussed but her expression radiating the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from perfect contentment. She practically glowed with happiness, her distinctive flower-shaped pupils seeming to shimmer with inner light. "Reika," I called softly as she began to walk past the common area. She turned toward me with a warm smile, her entire demeanor relaxed and peaceful. "Callie, I didn't realize you were back from your break." "Just returned," I confirmed, studying her face with professional curiosity. "You look happy." "I am," she said simply, settling into the chair across from me with fluid grace. "It was wonderful to serve Master today." The way she said serve carried undertones that made me raise an eyebrow. There was something almost reverential in her tone, a satisfaction that went beyond simple professional duty or even romantic affection. What exactly do you mean by serve? I asked carefully, my intelligence-gathering instincts engaging despite my attempt to maintain casual conversation. Rekha's smile widened, and there was something almost childlike in her joy as she replied, I'm just so happy that he's accepted me as his pet. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my eyes widen in pure shock, my teacup freezing halfway to my lips as I processed what she had just said. Bait. She had actually used that word, with complete sincerity and obvious delight. You're bait. I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. Rekha hummed contentedly, either oblivious to my shock or simply too happy to care about my reaction. It's perfect, really. I get to stay close to him, to serve him in whatever way makes him happy, and he takes such good care of me. I feel so fulfilled. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process this revelation. This went far beyond the romantic devotion I had assumed she felt for Arthur. This was something else entirely, a dynamic that operated on levels I hadn't even considered. But even as part of my mind recoiled at the implications, I couldn't ignore the obvious truth staring me in the face. Rekha was radiant with happiness. Not the nervous joy of someone caught up in an uncertain romance, not the desperate satisfaction of someone clinging to scraps of attention. This was deep, abiding contentment, the peace of someone who had found exactly what they needed. Her violet eyes sparkled with genuine fulfillment, her posture relaxed and confident. Whatever this arrangement was, whatever unconventional dynamic she and Arthur had developed, it was clearly working for her in ways that conventional relationships hadn't. Who was I to judge what brought her such obvious joy? I see, I said finally, though I wasn't sure I saw anything clearly anymore. Chapter 568, Upper Years. Mythos Academy was scheduled to reopen in September, marking the beginning of what would be my final year at the prestigious institution. The thought carried a mixture of anticipation and melancholy. This represented the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of something entirely new. I'll be going now, I said with a warm smile as I looked at my parents and Arya in the transport hub. The Slatemark Empire's central warp gate facility was bustling with activity as students from across the continent prepared to return to their respective academies. Take care of yourselves while I'm gone. You too, dear, Mother replied, pulling me into a brief but fierce embrace. Your final year. Make it count. Father nodded approvingly, his expression carrying the quiet pride that had characterized his reactions to my achievements over the past few years. We'll be here when you need us. Arya grinned at me with characteristic mischief. Try not to cause too many political incidents this year, big brother. Some of us would like a peaceful academic experience. I make no promises, I replied with mock seriousness. Trouble has a way of finding me. More like you have a way of finding trouble, she shot back, but her tone was affectionate rather than critical. Arya's third year at Slatemark Academy would begin as well, but her departure was scheduled for later in the week, since her institution was located within the Empire itself. Mythos Academy, situated on its own sovereign island in international waters, required earlier travel to accommodate the additional transit time. The warp gate to Mythos Academy was impressive even by modern standards. A massive archway constructed from rare materials and enhanced with some of the most sophisticated magical technology available. The energy field within the arch shimmered with otherworldly light, creating a portal that could transport passengers across vast distances in mere moments. After presenting my student credentials and undergoing the standard security checks, I stepped through the gate and felt the familiar sensation of magical transportation. A brief moment of disorientation followed by the solid reassurance of arriving at my destination. Mythos Academy's arrival terminal was exactly as I remembered it, sleek, efficient, and designed to handle the constant flow of students, faculty, and visitors that kept the institution functioning. The island itself was visible through the terminal's floor-to-ceiling windows, a carefully maintained paradise that served as one of the world's premier educational facilities. The Academy's Hyperloop transportation system was one of its most impressive features. A network of pneumatic tubes that could transport passengers between different areas of the island at remarkable speeds. The system was both practical and environmentally conscious, allowing rapid movement without disrupting the island's carefully maintained ecosystem. I boarded the Hyperloop pod designated for the Class 4A dormitory, settling into the comfortable seating as the system engaged. The journey through the transparent tubes offered spectacular views of the island's landscape, pristine forests, carefully tended gardens, and the various academic buildings that housed different departments and year levels. The fourth-year dormitories were located in a particularly scenic area of the island, positioned to offer both privacy and easy access to the advanced facilities that final-year students required. The building itself was modern and comfortable, designed to provide a home-like atmosphere for students who would be spending their last year together. My room was exactly as I had left it at the end of the previous term. Spacious, well-appointed, and equipped with all the technological amenities that modern students required. After unpacking my belongings and settling back into the familiar space, I made my way to the dormitory's common area. Rose, Cecilia, Rachel, and Serafina were already gathered there, having arrived on earlier transports throughout the day. The sight of them together, relaxed and happy in the comfortable surroundings, brought a smile to my face. "Arthur," Rose called out as I entered, her face lighting up with genuine joy. She had grown even more beautiful over the summer break, her auburn hair catching the light and her brown eyes sparkling with the confidence that had become such an integral part of her personality. "Finally," Rachel said with mock exasperation, though her deep blue eyes betrayed her pleasure at seeing me. Her golden hair was styled in a new way that emphasized her graceful features, and she was wearing a casual outfit that managed to be both comfortable and elegant. Cecilia looked up from the book she had been reading, her red eyes bright with welcome. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd gotten lost in your guild responsibilities." Serafina offered one of her rare, genuine smiles. "It's good to have everyone together again." We spent the evening catching up on our summer experiences, sharing stories about family visits, guild activities, and the various adventures we had each encountered during the break. The easy camaraderie between us was exactly what I had been missing during the busy months of guild expansion and political maneuvering. As the night grew late, we eventually retired to our respective rooms, though not before making plans to meet for breakfast the following morning. The familiar routine of dormitory life settled around me like a comfortable blanket, and I fell asleep looking forward to the challenges and opportunities that the new academic year would bring. The next morning arrived with the soft chime of the Academy's wake-up system. After preparing for the day and meeting the others for breakfast in the dormitory's dining hall, we made our way to the Hyperloop station for transport to the academic buildings. The fourth-year facilities were housed in their own dedicated building, an impressive structure that reflected the prestige and importance of final-year education. The building's architecture was both functional and inspiring, designed to provide an environment that would challenge students while supporting their academic and personal growth. Class 4A was located on the 5th floor, accessible through high-speed elevators that offered glimpses of the building's impressive atrium and the various specialized laboratories and classrooms that filled the lower levels. I entered the familiar classroom to find several of my classmates already present. Lucifer Windward was seated near the center of the room, his commanding presence unmistakable even in casual conversation with other students. Clara Lopez occupied a desk near the windows, her navy blue hair falling like a curtain around her face as she appeared to be dozing despite the early hour, her violet eyes barely visible between half-closed lids. Ian Vizirian looked up as I entered, offering a nod of acknowledgement that carried the friendliness that characterized most of our interactions. Rinkagu seemed more subdued than I remembered, though he managed a polite greeting. Jean Ashbluff was present as well, having returned from his work in the West in time for the new term. As I took my usual seat, I noticed something unexpected about the classroom layout. Instead of the 10 desks that had been arranged for our class in previous years, there were now 14 seats positioned throughout the room. "Lucifer," I said, catching his attention with a questioning look, "why are there 4 extra desks?" His response was a knowing smile that suggested he was privy to information that hadn't been shared with the rest of us. You'll find out soon enough. Before I could press him for more details, the classroom door opened and Professor Nero entered with his characteristic purposeful stride. The professor was an imposing figure, mid-immortal rank in power, with the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention and respect. His reputation for academic excellence was matched only by his reputation for demanding the highest standards from his students. "Good morning, Class 4A," he said, his voice carrying easily throughout the room. "I trust you all had productive summer breaks and are prepared for the challenges that await you in your final year." A chorus of polite affirmations answered him, though I noticed that several students were glancing at the extra desks with obvious curiosity. Professor Nero seemed to notice our collective attention to the altered classroom arrangement. His expression showed a hint of what might have been amusement as he prepared to address our unspoken questions. "I see you've noticed the additional seating," he said, setting his materials on the instructor's desk with deliberate precision. "That brings me to an important announcement regarding this year's class composition." The room fell into expectant silence. Every student focused on the professor's words. "This year, Class 4A will be joined by 4 transfer students," he announced, his tone carrying the weight of significant news. "These new students will be—" Professor Nero paused, his gaze moving across the classroom, as if to ensure he had everyone's complete attention. "Well," he said with what was definitely amusement now, "perhaps it would be better if I let them introduce themselves." Chapter 569, New Students. Professor Nero moved toward the classroom door, opening it with a gesture that suggested the new students had been waiting just outside. "Please, come in and introduce yourselves to your new classmates." 4 figures entered the classroom, each carrying themselves with the poise that marked them as exceptional individuals despite their unfamiliar faces. The first was a young woman I recognized immediately, Siola Moyong, with her distinctive black hair and golden eyes that seemed to assess everything with analytical precision. Her presence here was unexpected but not entirely surprising, given the political upheavals in the East. Following her was a young woman with an elegant bearing and confident stride. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated manner, and she carried herself with the kind of natural authority that suggested noble breeding. There was something about her posture that spoke of both intelligence and determination. Arya Gu, the third transfer student, was a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that suggested considerable capability. Her dark hair was styled in a practical manner, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that spoke of serious training and discipline. Ava Peng, the fourth and final student, was another familiar face, though one I hadn't expected to see in an academic setting. Dia Solarin entered with grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her red hair catching the light and her golden eyes reflecting a mixture of nervousness and determination. Siola Moyong, the first student, introduced herself with a small bow that managed to be both respectful and dignified. "Previously of Starcrest Academy. I'm honored to join Class 4A." The second student stepped forward with natural confidence. "Arya Gu of the Gu family," she said, her voice carrying the cultured tones of established nobility. "Also from Starcrest Academy. I look forward to the challenges ahead." The third student's introduction was crisp and professional. "Ava Peng, formerly of Starcrest Academy as well. Thank you for welcoming us into your class." Finally, Dia stepped forward, her voice carrying a slight tremor that suggested this moment held particular significance for her. "Dia Solarin. I come from a different background than the others, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to study here." Professor Nero waited for the introductions to conclude before addressing the obvious questions that were undoubtedly forming in everyone's minds. As you may have surmised, these transfers are part of a larger reorganization within the magical education system. Starcrest Academy was unfortunately destroyed during recent conflicts, necessitating the relocation of its surviving students. The sobering reminder of the ongoing dangers that plagued our world cast a momentary shadow over the classroom. Starcrest Academy had been a respected institution, and its destruction represented not just the loss of a school, but the loss of lives and futures that had been cut short. Mythos Academy has accepted numerous transfer students this year, Professor Nero continued, as we lost several of our own students during the exchange program due to vampire attacks. However, the caliber of students now assembled in Class 4A represents the largest and most talented fourth-year class in the Academy's history. I found myself glancing around the room, taking in the faces of both familiar and new classmates. 14 students, each representing exceptional talent and potential. The tragic circumstances that had brought us together couldn't diminish the reality that this class would likely produce some of the most influential figures of our generation. This brings me to another important matter, Professor Nero announced, producing a holographic display that materialized above his desk. Given the changes in class composition and recent achievements both within and outside the Academy, it's time for updated rankings. The familiar tension that always accompanied ranking announcements settled over the classroom. These numbers would influence everything from course selections to internship opportunities, and for students at our level, they often foreshadowed future career trajectories. The refreshed rankings for Class 4A are as follows. Professor Nero began, his voice carrying the weight of official pronouncement. Rank 1, Arthur Nightingale. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and pressure at getting the top position. Rank 2, Lucifer Windward. Lucifer's expression remained composed, though I caught a flash of competitive determination in his eyes. The small gap between us had always pushed both of us to greater achievements. Rank 3, Ren Kagu. Ren's positioning was impressive, though I noticed the way his shoulders tensed at the announcement. The weight of family expectations and recent political changes in the East were clearly affecting him. Rank 4, Seola Moyong. The newest transfer student's placement in the top 5 was remarkable, speaking to exceptional abilities that had been recognized despite her recent arrival. Rank 5, Rachel Creighton. Rachel's slight smile suggested satisfaction with her position, though I knew she would use it as motivation to climb higher. Her combination of natural talent and rigorous training made her a formidable student. Rank 6, Cecilia Slatemark. Cecilia's red eyes showed approval at her ranking. Her political acumen and magical capabilities made her a natural leader among our class. Rank 7, Serafina Zenith. Serafina's expression remained characteristically serene, though I could see the competitive spirit that drove her constant improvement. Rank 8, Gene Ashbluff. Gene nodded acknowledgement of his position, his recent experience in the West having clearly contributed to his development. Rank 9, Rose Springshaper. Rose's ranking reflected steady growth and increasing confidence. Her journey from uncertainty to capability had been remarkable to witness. Rank 10, Ian Vizirian. Ian's placement in the top 10 maintained his status as a serious student, though his reserved nature often caused others to underestimate his abilities. Rank 11, Clara Lopez. Clara appeared to be dozing through her own ranking announcement, though I suspected she was more aware than she appeared. Rank 12, Dia Solarin. Dia's positioning was notable given her unconventional background. Professor Nero seemed to anticipate questions about her placement. Rank 13, Arya Gu. The Gu family representative's ranking was respectable for a transfer student, though I could see the determined glint in her eyes that suggested she wouldn't remain in that position for long. Rank 14, Ava Peng. The final ranking completed our class roster, though being last among such exceptional students was hardly a mark of shame. Professor Nero addressed the obvious question about Dia's placement. Miss Solarin is approximately 1 year older than most of you, but her educational background and the timing of her circumstances made 4th year the most appropriate placement. Her formal education was interrupted by external factors beyond her control. The diplomatic phrasing couldn't entirely mask the tragic circumstances that had brought Dia to the Academy, but it preserved her dignity while acknowledging the unique challenges she faced. Now then, Professor Nero continued, his tone shifting to the brisk efficiency that marked the beginning of serious academic work. Let's begin this year's curriculum. You'll find that 4th year presents challenges unlike anything you've encountered previously. As the professor launched into his overview of our upcoming coursework, I found myself stealing glances at the 4 new additions to our class. Siola's presence suggested political maneuvering in the East that I would need to understand better. Arya Gu represented the influential Gu family's interests, which could have significant implications for class dynamics. Ava remained an unknown quantity that would require careful observation. And Dia's placement here opened possibilities and complications that I was only beginning to consider. The largest Class 4A in Academy history was about to embark on what promised to be the most eventful final year any of us could imagine. Chapter 570, Coffee with Clara. Professor Nero concluded his curriculum overview by explaining the new evaluation system. Like previous years, fourth-year coursework is individually adapted to each student's unique abilities and development needs. While I will serve as your primary coordinator, you'll work with multiple specialized faculty members. Our tablets lit up, showing individual schedules. My own curriculum: Advanced Deep Dark Theory, Pure Light Applications, Six Circle Magic Development, and Enhanced Aura Manipulation. Additionally, Professor Nero continued, you will be evaluated through 3 practical missions throughout the first semester. These missions will directly impact your rankings, while written examinations will affect grades but not rankings. After fielding questions about the new system, Professor Nero did something unexpected. He set down his materials and regarded the class with what might have been approval. Normally, I would begin immediately with advanced theoretical applications, he said, his tone shifting to something slightly more relaxed. However, given the significant changes to our class composition and the Academy's recognition that integration is crucial for optimal performance, today will be designated as an adjustment period. A murmur of interest rippled through the classroom. Professor Nero was not known for deviating from academic schedules without compelling reasons. The administration has determined that allowing time for social integration among existing and transfer students will ultimately benefit everyone's academic performance, he continued. Therefore, there are no formal classes today. You are encouraged to use this time to familiarize yourselves with the Academy's facilities and, more importantly, to establish working relationships with your new classmates. The announcement was met with obvious relief from several students, though I noticed that some, particularly Siola and Arya, seemed to be using the opportunity to observe their new environment with analytical interest. I expect everyone to report to tomorrow's session prepared to engage with material that will challenge even your considerable abilities. Professor Nero added with a slight smile that suggested he was looking forward to that challenge. Dismissed. As students began gathering their belongings and engaging in tentative conversations, I found myself considering how best to use this unexpected free time. The opportunity to understand the new class dynamics was valuable, but I also needed to assess how the transfer students might affect the delicate balance of relationships that had developed over the previous 3 years. Arthur, a soft voice said behind me, interrupting my strategic considerations. I turned to find Clara Lopez approaching with her characteristic unhurried manner. Her navy blue hair was slightly disheveled, as if she had just woken up, and her violet eyes held that perpetually drowsy expression that had become her trademark. Despite her appearance, I knew Clara possessed sharp intelligence and observational skills that rivaled anyone in the class. Clara, I replied with genuine warmth. How was your summer break? Sleepy, she said with a small smile that suggested this was both literal truth and gentle humor. But productive. I spent most of it researching advanced sleep magic applications. That was so perfectly Clara that I couldn't help but smile in return. She had always managed to find ways to make her natural inclination toward rest into an academic advantage. Actually, she continued, I was wondering if you'd like to get coffee? It's been a while since we've had a proper conversation, and she paused, glancing around at the bustling classroom. It might be nice to catch up somewhere quieter. The invitation was unexpected but welcome. Clara and I had always maintained a comfortable friendship, though our interactions had been limited during the previous year due to my increasing involvement with guild responsibilities and the complex dynamics of my relationships with Rose, Rachel, Cecilia, and Serafina. I'd like that, I said sincerely. Which coffee shop? The one near the botanical gardens, she confirmed. They have those comfortable window seats, and it's usually quiet this time of day. We made our way out of the classroom together, passing clusters of students who were already beginning to form conversation groups. I noticed Ciola engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion with Ren about Eastern political developments, while Arya was introducing herself to Rachel and Cecilia with the kind of diplomatic charm that suggested noble training. The Academy's Hyperloop system transported us efficiently to the Botanical District, where the coffee shop Clara had chosen occupied a prime location overlooking carefully maintained gardens that showcased magical flora from around the world. The establishment was a favorite among students and faculty who preferred a more tranquil environment for study or conversation. The interior was designed to complement the natural beauty visible through its large windows, warm wood furnishings, comfortable seating arrangements, and the subtle aroma of expertly prepared coffee blends that sourced beans enhanced through magical cultivation techniques. Clara led us to a corner table beside a window that offered an excellent view of the gardens. Settling into her chair with the kind of graceful efficiency that suggested this was a familiar routine. She ordered something called a dream latte that apparently contained mild relaxation enchantments, while I opted for a more traditional espresso. "So," she said once our drinks arrived, her violet eyes focusing on me with surprising intensity despite her generally drowsy demeanor, "how are you really doing?" The question was more direct than I had expected from Clara, whose conversational style typically involved gentle meandering rather than pointed inquiry. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this was heading. "Arthur," she said with the patient tone of someone who was accustomed to cutting through social pleasantries. "You're dating 4 of the most remarkable women in our year, you're running a gold-rank guild, you're involved in political negotiations that affect entire continents, and you're somehow maintaining top academic standing. That's a lot for anyone to handle." I sipped my espresso while considering how to respond. Clara's observation was accurate, but her concern seemed genuine rather than judgmental. "I manage," I said finally. "It's challenging, but not impossible." "Managing and thriving are different things," she pointed out gently. "When was the last time you just relaxed? Did something purely for enjoyment rather than obligation or advancement?" The question caught me off guard because I couldn't immediately provide a satisfactory answer. My recent activities had indeed been driven by responsibility, strategy, or the needs of others. Even my time with Rose, Rachel, Cecilia, and Serafina, while personally fulfilling, carried emotional weight and relationship maintenance requirements. "That's what I thought," Clara said, interpreting my silence correctly. "You know, there's something to be said for the value of unstructured time." "Is that your professional opinion as someone who has made an art form of relaxation?" I asked with gentle teasing. Her smile was surprisingly bright. "Actually, yes. My research into sleep magic has taught me a lot about the importance of mental rest and recovery. You can't maintain peak performance indefinitely without allowing time for genuine restoration." As if to demonstrate her point, she settled deeper into her chair and gazed out at the botanical gardens with obvious contentment. The sight was so characteristic of Clara that I found myself relaxing despite my habitual tendency toward constant planning and analysis. "Tell me about your guild work," she said after a comfortable silence. "Not the political implications or strategic advantages, just what you actually enjoy about it." The question forced me to consider my activities from a different perspective. "I like the problem-solving aspects," I said slowly, "taking complex situations and finding solutions that benefit everyone involved. And I like working with people who are genuinely committed to making things better." "That sounds fulfilling," Clara observed. "What about the parts you don't like?" "The politics," I admitted without hesitation. "The constant need to consider how every action affects multiple relationships and alliances. Sometimes I miss being able to make decisions based purely on what seems right rather than what's strategically optimal." Clara nodded with understanding that suggested she had given considerable thought to such matters. "Have you considered that maybe the strategic approach and the right approach don't have to be mutually exclusive?" "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, pausing to sip her dream latte, "you seem to assume that doing what's right is somehow less sophisticated than doing what's politically advantageous. But what if your instincts about what's right are actually more accurate than complex political calculations? The observation was surprisingly insightful, and it touched on doubts I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. How often had I second-guessed moral intuitions in favor of strategic thinking? You might be onto something, I said thoughtfully. I usually am, she replied with mock arrogance that was entirely undermined by her sleepy expression. It's one of the advantages of spending so much time in a relaxed mental state. You notice things that people miss when they're constantly analyzing and planning. We continued talking as the afternoon progressed, our conversation meandering through topics ranging from academic challenges to personal observations about our classmates. Clara's perspective was refreshingly uncomplicated. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding people and situations without immediately categorizing them in terms of advantage or disadvantage. What do you think of the transfer students? I asked as we watched other students moving through the gardens outside. Ciola is incredibly focused, Clara said without hesitation. Almost unnaturally so. I suspect she's carrying more responsibility than most people our age should have to handle. And the others? Arya has the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. That can be either wonderful or problematic depending on how she uses it. She paused thoughtfully. Ava is harder to read, but I get the impression she's been through things that most of us haven't experienced. And Dia? What about Dia? Clara's expression grew more serious. Dia is trying very hard to prove something, but I'm not sure she knows what it is yet. There's a lot of pain there, but also tremendous determination. She took another sip of her dream latte before continuing. Actually, speaking of training experiences, I spent some time at the Tower of Magic during one of the breaks. My mother basically threw me there to develop my potential properly. She said the last part with mild amusement rather than resentment. Really? That's interesting. How was it? Sleepy, she replied with characteristic honesty. But I did train with Cecilia for a while. She's quite intense when she's focused on magical theory. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. Cecilia never mentioned training with you at the tower. Clara let out a small yawn, covering her mouth politely. Doesn't surprise me. It wasn't particularly memorable training, I'm sure. I spent most of it trying not to fall asleep during the theoretical sessions. She shrugged with complete indifference, as if the fact that one of our classmates had omitted mentioning their shared training was entirely unremarkable. Her assessments were remarkably perceptive for someone who gave the impression of being perpetually half asleep. I found myself wondering how much Clara observed that the rest of us missed while we were focused on more obvious concerns. You're very good at reading people, I observed. It's easier when you're not worried about how they might affect your own plans, she replied with characteristic directness. Most people are too busy thinking about themselves to really see others clearly. As the afternoon light began to shift toward evening, we eventually made our way back toward the dormitories, our conversation having provided exactly the kind of mental rest that Clara had suggested I needed. For a few hours, I had been able to simply enjoy the company of a friend without considering strategic implications or relationship management. Chapter 571. Prelude to Fall Ball 1. After my refreshing conversation with Clara, I was making my way back through the academy's corridors when my neural interface chimed with an official communication. A message from the headmaster's office appeared in my peripheral vision, requesting my immediate presence for a private meeting. Headmaster Eva Lopez, rank 10 of humanity, a radiant rank mage whose power commanded respect across every continent. The fact that she wanted to see me personally, rather than through administrative channels, suggested this wasn't a routine academic matter. I made my way through the academy's administrative wing, past the efficiently bustling offices and up to the top floor where the headmaster's private office occupied a position that offered panoramic views of the island's landscape. The elevator ride gave me time to consider what might have prompted this summons. The office door was crafted from rare materials that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light, and I could feel the subtle magical wards that protected the space from both physical intrusion and magical surveillance. I knocked respectfully and waited for permission to enter. "Come in, Arthur," came the familiar voice from within. I stepped into an office that managed to be both imposing and comfortable. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of the academy grounds, while the furniture was arranged to create an atmosphere of professional authority tempered by personal warmth. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with texts on magical theory, educational philosophy, and what appeared to be personal journals dating back decades. "Greetings, headmaster," I said with a respectful smile as I took in the sight of Eva Lopez seated behind her impressive desk. She was exactly as I remembered, navy blue hair that seemed to capture and reflect light in subtle ways, and eyes that held the kind of depth that came from years of bearing tremendous responsibility. Her presence radiated the controlled power that marked all Radiant Rank individuals. But there was something else in her expression as she looked at me. Something that might have been concern. "Hello, Arthur," she replied, gesturing to the chair positioned in front of her desk. "Please sit." As I settled into the comfortable chair, Eva studied my face with the kind of analytical attention that suggested she was seeing more than surface appearances. "You seem more and more remarkable every time I see you," she said with a slight sigh that carried complex emotions. "It's almost ridiculous how quickly you're developing." I chuckled at her assessment, recognizing the mixture of pride and apprehension in her tone. "I do my best to meet expectations, headmaster. That's exactly what concerns me," she replied, her voice taking on a more serious quality. "But before we discuss that, how are you doing?" "Really doing?" I understood immediately what she was referring to. The loss of Magnus Dracar was still a raw wound, one that affected not just me personally but the entire magical community's understanding of what was possible. "I am managing," I said honestly. "Master accomplished what needed to be done. He killed the vampire monarch and saved countless lives in the process. Now I must do what I need to do to continue that work." Eva nodded approvingly. "That is a healthy mindset to have. Magnus would be proud of your resilience." She paused, her expression growing more contemplative. "Speaking of what you need to do, I understand our little troublemaker is planning to leave the academy before graduation?" There was no point in attempting deception with someone of Eva's capabilities and experience. "Yes," I confirmed. "My responsibilities with Ouroboros have grown beyond what I can manage while maintaining full-time student status. I need to focus on the future." "For the future," she repeated quietly, leaning back in her chair as if the phrase carried weight beyond its simple meaning. "Arthur, let me ask you something. What do you think is the greatest source of frustration for all Radiant Rank mages like myself?" I considered the question carefully, sensing that this was leading toward something significant. When I didn't immediately respond, Eva continued. "It's that despite reaching the pinnacle of magical development, despite achieving power that most people can barely comprehend, we are still too weak," she said, extending her hand palm up in front of her. With a slight curl of her fingers, the air around her hand began to distort. Space itself seemed to fracture, creating visible cracks in reality that made my eyes water to look at directly. The demonstration lasted only a moment before she allowed the effect to dissipate, but the implications were staggering. This was the power of a Radiant Rank mage, the ability to manipulate fundamental forces of reality itself. And yet, Eva continued, her voice carrying bitter irony, even this level of power wasn't sufficient to prevent the tragedies we've witnessed. The Vampire War, the destruction of Starcrest Academy, the countless lives lost to threats we should have been able to stop. She gestured toward the window, where the peaceful academy grounds stretched toward the horizon. Immortal rank mages can claim they lack the power to make a difference. They can say they weren't strong enough, weren't Radiant Rank, so they couldn't have changed the outcome. But we who have reached the absolute peak of human magical development, we have no such excuse. Eva's eyes seemed to cloud over, as if she was seeing something far more distant than the landscape outside her windows. We were still too weak to defeat the enemies that truly matter. That is our greatest failure. She shook her head, apparently pushing away whatever memories had surfaced. But I didn't call you here to burden you with the philosophical struggles of old Radiant Rank mages. I wanted you to know that I will not attempt to stop you from whatever path you're choosing to pursue. Her gaze focused on me with laser intensity. You are a talent too extraordinary to be constrained by institutional limitations. For me to hold you back would be a sin worthy of severe punishment. Thank you, Headmaster, I said, genuinely moved by her support. That means more than you know. She paused, seeming to search for the right words. Be careful not to carry more weight than you need to. The world has a way of placing impossible burdens on those capable of bearing them. After exchanging a few more words about my transition plans and maintaining connections with the Academy, I took my leave. Eva's blessing on my departure felt like the removal of a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Eva Lopez watched the door close behind Arthur Nightingale, then turned her chair to face the windows that overlooked her academy. The peaceful scene before her was a stark contrast to the memories that his visit had stirred up. She thought about power. Specifically, the cruel irony of achieving everything she had once dreamed of, only to discover it wasn't enough. Eva had been young once, driven by the kind of burning ambition that consumed everything in its path. She had dedicated herself to mastering pure light with an intensity that worried her instructors and amazed her peers. Every waking moment had been spent in pursuit of greater strength, deeper understanding, more perfect control over the forces she wielded. She had risen through the ranks with meteoric speed, earning recognition as one of the most promising mages of her generation. Her techniques were innovative, her power was staggering, and her theoretical understanding pushed the boundaries of what experts thought possible. When she achieved Radiant Rank status at an age that made her one of the youngest to ever reach that pinnacle, the magical community had hailed her as a prodigy who would reshape their understanding of what human potential could achieve. And for a time, Eva had believed she truly could change everything. She had been in love then. Marcus had been brilliant in his own right. Not a mage, but a scholar whose research into magical theory provided crucial insights that enhanced her own development. He had been her anchor, her reminder that power was meaningless without someone to protect and something to fight for. When the crisis came, a threat that now seemed almost quaint compared to recent disasters, Eva had been confident that her newly achieved Radiant Rank abilities would be sufficient to handle any challenge. She had been wrong. Despite wielding power that could crack reality itself, despite possessing magical capabilities that placed her among the most formidable individuals alive, she had been too weak to save the man she loved. Marcus had died while she fought enemies she should have been able to destroy with ease. Not because her power was insufficient in absolute terms, but because the real world didn't provide convenient opportunities to apply overwhelming force. Because politics and timing and circumstance had conspired to place her incredible abilities just out of reach when they were needed most. That was when Eva Lopez had learned the cruelest lesson that awaited all those who climbed to the peak of human achievement. Even perfect power wielded perfectly was sometimes not enough. She had channeled her grief into building something lasting, the kind of institution that could nurture talents like Arthur Nightingale and prepare them for challenges that individual strength alone couldn't overcome. Mythos Academy had become her legacy, her attempt to ensure that future generations would have advantages she had lacked. But watching Arthur walk away, carrying burdens that seemed to grow heavier with each passing month, Eva found herself hoping desperately that his path wouldn't lead to the same bitter realization that had shaped her own life. Arthur Nightingale was a talent unlike any she had ever encountered. His potential seemed limitless, his development unprecedented, his capacity for growth beyond anything the magical community had previously witnessed. If anyone could break through the limitations that had constrained even Radiant Rank mages, it would be him. She just prayed that he wouldn't have to learn, as she had, that sometimes even limitless potential wasn't enough to protect the people who mattered most. "Bloom as you must, Arthur," she whispered to the empty office, her words carrying all the hope and fear that came with watching exceptional individuals attempt to transcend the boundaries that had defeated everyone before them. "And may you never face the moment when all your power proves insufficient." Outside her windows, the academy continued its peaceful routine, training the next generation of mages who would inherit a world that demanded more from them than any previous generation had been asked to give. Eva turned back to her desk, returning to the endless administrative work that kept this institution functioning. But her thoughts remained with a young man whose destiny seemed to exceed even her ability to comprehend, and whose success or failure might determine whether human magical development could truly transcend its current limitations. For Arthur's sake, and for the sake of everyone counting on the next generation to succeed where theirs had fallen short, she hoped the answer would be yes. Chapter 572. Prelude to Fall Ball 2. The Fall Ball. The thought of it lingered in my mind like the soft chime of distant bells, equal parts promising and melancholic. I had missed the previous balls due to guild responsibilities and political obligations, and the four girls were insistent, no, determined, that I make an appearance this time. Their logic was simple. My absence was no longer excusable, and they wanted this night with me, away from the usual chaos and shadowed schemes that seemed to define our lives. For once, I didn't have pressing matters that demanded my immediate attention, and I did want to enjoy academy life during this final year. After all, once I graduated, or more accurately, once I left to focus entirely on Ouroboros, these moments of relative normalcy would become increasingly rare. "Isn't that right, Luna?" I asked mentally, brushing a hand through my hair as I stared out the window of my dormitory room. She responded with a hum of agreement, a sound that carried both warmth and an undertone of something that might have been concern. "You deserve this evening," her voice murmured in my mind. "These moments of peace won't come often in the years ahead." We talked about it before, Luna and I, this sense that I was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down into an uncertain future that would demand more from me than anything I had yet faced. My final year at Mythos Academy represented the last vestige of a simpler time, before the full weight of responsibility settled permanently on my shoulders. The world was changing. The destruction of Starcrest Academy, the ongoing aftermath of the Vampire War, the political upheavals across multiple continents. All of it pointed toward an era of increasing darkness and complexity. The relative safety and structure of academy life would soon be replaced by a reality where every decision carried life or death consequences, not just for myself but for countless others who would depend on my choices. Ouroboros was expanding rapidly, taking on projects and responsibilities that would have been unthinkable for a guild of our size just a year ago. The Etherite mining operation alone represented a level of strategic importance that placed us at the center of continental politics. Success would bring unprecedented opportunities. Failure could destabilize magical technology development for decades. "You're thinking too far ahead," Luna observed gently. "The future will demand what it demands. Tonight is about the present." I exhaled slowly, acknowledging the wisdom in her words even as the weight of anticipation pressed against my consciousness. She was right, of course. The challenges ahead were inevitable, but they weren't here yet. Tonight offered a rare opportunity to simply be a student, to dance and laugh and pretend that the world beyond the academy's borders wasn't waiting to test every limit of my capabilities. "I suppose I'm just realizing how much everything is about to change," I thought back to her. "After this year, there won't be any more dormitory conversations, no more classes with friends, no more pretending that my biggest concern is academic rankings. Change isn't always loss," Luna replied with characteristic insight. "You're becoming who you need to be. That's not something to mourn." Perhaps not, but it was something to acknowledge. The Arthur Nightingale who would leave Mythos Academy would be fundamentally different from the one who had arrived 3 years ago. The responsibilities, the relationships, the sheer scope of what I was expected to accomplish. All of it had transformed me in ways I was still trying to understand. The four girls had been part of that transformation. Rose, with her journey from uncertainty to confidence. Rachel, whose warmth and strength had become one of my greatest sources of comfort. Cecilia, whose political acumen and unwavering support had helped me navigate impossible situations. Serafina, whose quiet wisdom and ethereal presence had taught me that strength came in many forms. Each of them deserved this evening. They deserved to have the version of me who could focus entirely on them, who could set aside strategic considerations and simply enjoy their company. For one night, I could be their partner rather than a guild master, their friend rather than a political figure. You're getting sentimental, Luna observed with gentle amusement. Maybe, I admitted, but I think I'm entitled to a little sentimentality. This really is the end of an era. The world beyond graduation would be darker, more complex, more demanding than anything I had yet encountered. The enemies we faced would be more powerful, the stakes higher, the margin for error smaller. Every alliance would carry hidden costs. Every victory would plant the seeds of new challenges. Every decision would ripple outward in ways I couldn't predict or control. But that darkness was tomorrow's concern. Tonight belonged to music and laughter, to the simple pleasure of holding someone I cared about while we moved across a dance floor, to conversations that didn't require strategic calculations or political maneuvering. Are you ready? Luna asked as I moved toward my wardrobe to select formal attire appropriate for the evening. As ready as I can be, I replied, choosing a midnight blue dress jacket that complemented my eyes. Though I have to admit, part of me wishes I could freeze this moment, this feeling of being on the threshold rather than having already crossed it. Time doesn't work that way, Luna said with gentle finality. But you can make tonight count for something. You can give them and yourself a perfect memory to carry forward. She was right. The fall ball wasn't just a social obligation or a brief respite from responsibility. It was an opportunity to create something beautiful before the world demanded that beauty be set aside in favor of necessity. I finished preparing for the evening, adjusting my appearance until I looked like exactly what I was supposed to be. A young man attending a formal dance with people he cared about. Not a guild master, not a political figure, not someone carrying the weight of continental alliances and revolutionary technology projects. Just Arthur for one last night. That's better, Luna said approvingly as I checked my reflection one final time. You look like someone who remembers how to smile. I do remember, I told her. I just don't get many opportunities to practice. The evening ahead would be bittersweet, a celebration of what was ending as much as what might begin. But perhaps that was appropriate. The best memories often carried that mixture of joy and melancholy, the recognition that perfect moments were precious precisely because they couldn't last forever. As I prepared to leave my room and meet the girls, I found myself genuinely looking forward to the night ahead. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, tonight offered something rare and valuable. The chance to simply be happy, surrounded by people who mattered, in a place that had become home. The fall ball awaited, and for once, I intended to let it be nothing more complicated than exactly what it appeared to be. A dance, shared with people I loved, on a beautiful autumn evening.
Perfect, Luna whispered approvingly.
Now go make some memories worth keeping. Chapter 573, Fall Ball 1. The Academy's luminous grandium had been transformed into something that belonged in fairy tales rather than educational institutions. The prestigious ballroom, normally used only for the most significant Academy events, now glowed with crystalline chandeliers that cast warm, golden light across polished marble floors. Floating orbs of soft magical illumination drifted lazily through the air like captured stars, while the walls were draped in rich fabrics that shifted color subtly with each movement. Arrangements of autumn flowers, enhanced with preservation spells to maintain their perfect beauty, filled the space with delicate fragrance. But before I could experience any of that splendor, I had to survive the journey there with 4 of the most remarkable women at Mythos Academy. Arthur, you look wonderful, Rose said as she settled into the luxurious interior of the AI-controlled limousine that had arrived to transport us to the evening's festivities. Her emerald green gown complemented her auburn hair perfectly, and her brown eyes sparkled with excitement that was infectious. Thank you, I replied, adjusting my midnight blue formal jacket as I took in the sight of my 4 companions arranged around the vehicle's spacious interior. Though I have to say, I'm feeling somewhat outclassed by the company. As you should, Rachel said with characteristic warmth, her sapphire blue dress bringing out the depths of her eyes as she laughed. We've been planning our coordination for weeks. Indeed, the 4 of them looked absolutely stunning. Cecilia sat with regal poise, her golden hair styled in an elaborate updo that showcased her elegant neck and shoulders. Her crimson gown brought out the striking red of her eyes, and she moved with the confident bearing of someone who had been attending formal events since childhood. Serafina occupied the seat across from me, and I understood immediately why she had taken slightly longer to prepare. Her silver hair had been arranged in an intricate style that seemed to incorporate actual starlight, creating an otherworldly effect that perfectly complemented her ice-blue eyes. Her pale silver gown emphasized her ethereal beauty while remaining appropriately formal for the occasion. "The Academy really went all out this year," Cecilia observed as our limousine glided smoothly along the route toward the luminous Grandium. Through the vehicle's transparent roof, we could see other transport arriving ahead of us. Some traditional carriages enhanced with modern comfort systems, others sleek vehicles like our own. "This will be my last fall ball as a student," I said with a mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. "I want to make sure it's memorable." "It will be," Serafina said with quiet confidence. "We'll make sure of that." "Plus," Rachel added with obvious enthusiasm, "this is the first major Academy social event since the transfer students arrived. It should be interesting to see how they adapt to Academy traditions." As our limousine approached the entrance to the luminous Grandium, I could see the familiar setup that accompanied all major Academy events. The red carpet extended from the building's ornate entrance, flanked by sophisticated AI camera systems that would capture arrival photos for the Academy's archives. "Ready for the cameras?" I asked, noting the familiar arrangement that had been part of every fall ball I'd attended. "Always," Rose replied with confidence that had grown significantly since our first Academy formal event together. The limousine came to a smooth stop at the beginning of the red carpet, and I could see other students ahead of us posing for the AI cameras with practiced ease. After 3 years of Academy events, most students had become comfortable with the documentation process. "Ready?" Rachel asked, her hand finding mine with reassuring warmth. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied honestly. The limousine's door opened with silent efficiency, and I stepped out first before turning to assist my companions. The evening air was crisp and clear, filled with the excitement that always seemed to hover around major Academy events. Rose emerged first, accepting my offered hand with grace that made the simple gesture seem elegant. Her emerald gown flowed around her as she stood, and I heard several appreciative murmurs from nearby observers. Cecilia followed, moving with the kind of natural authority that commanded attention without seeming to demand it. Her crimson dress seemed to capture and reflect the red carpet's lighting, creating a dramatic effect that the AI cameras immediately focused on. Rachel practically bounced out of the limousine, her enthusiasm for the evening evident in every movement. Her sapphire blue gown swirled around her as she joined our growing group, and her smile was bright enough to rival the ballroom's lighting. Finally, Serafina emerged with the ethereal grace that characterized all her movements. Her silver hair seemed to shimmer with each step, and her pale gown created an almost otherworldly effect that drew gasps of admiration from nearby students. As we began making our way along the red carpet, I became acutely aware of the attention we were attracting. The AI cameras tracked our movement with sophisticated precision, capturing images from multiple angles, while other students paused to watch our procession. "Arthur Nightingale and companions," I heard one student whisper to another with obvious excitement. "For dates," came the amazed response. "How does someone even manage that? Look at how comfortable they all seem with each other," another voice observed. "That's not fake politeness. They genuinely like each other." The last comment was particularly gratifying because it was accurate. One of the most remarkable aspects of our relationship was how well the 4 women got along with each other. Rather than competing for my attention, they had developed genuine friendships that made group activities like this feel natural rather than forced. "Smile and wave," Rachel murmured quietly as we paused for the cameras at the midpoint of the red carpet. "This is actually fun." She was right. Despite my initial nervousness about the public nature of our arrival, I found myself genuinely enjoying the experience. The 4 women beside me were clearly having a wonderful time, and their happiness was infectious. As we completed our walk along the red carpet and approached the entrance to the luminous Grandium, I could hear the sound of classical music drifting from within, played by an orchestra that seamlessly blended traditional instruments with magical enhancement techniques. "Here we go," Serafina said softly as the ornate doors opened before us. The sight that greeted us was even more spectacular than I had anticipated. The luminous grandium lived up to its name, with magical lighting that seemed to make the very air sparkle. Other students were already arriving, their formal attire creating a kaleidoscope of colors and styles that reflected the diverse backgrounds represented at Mythos Academy. "This is incredible," Rose breathed, her brown eyes wide with appreciation for the transformed space. "It really is," I agreed, offering my arms to escort my companions into the ballroom proper. As we made our way inside, I couldn't help but notice the way conversations seemed to pause as we passed. Having one date to a formal event was normal. Arriving with 4 was something else entirely. But if the attention bothered any of my companions, they showed no sign of it. Instead, they seemed to take obvious pleasure in the evening and in each other's company. We found a table that had been reserved for us, one that offered an excellent view of the dance floor while providing comfortable seating for conversation. The Academy had clearly spared no expense for this event. The table settings included crystal glasses that seemed to shimmer with their own light, and the centerpiece was an arrangement of flowers that subtly changed color in harmony with the room's magical lighting. "This is beautiful," Serafina observed, her analytical mind clearly appreciating the sophisticated magic that went into creating the evening's ambience. "It really is," Rachel agreed, then leaned closer to me with a mischievous expression. "Though I have to say, I'm looking forward to the dancing more than the decor." Before I could respond to her implied challenge, a ripple of conversation swept through the ballroom. The kind of murmur that indicated something unexpected or noteworthy had just occurred. Following the direction of numerous gazes, I looked toward the main entrance and immediately understood what had captured everyone's attention. Lucifer Windward had just arrived, and he wasn't alone. Siola Moyong stood at his left side, looking absolutely magnificent in a gown that managed to be both elegant and practical. A deep navy that complemented her black hair and brought out the gold in her eyes. Her usual analytical demeanor was softened by what appeared to be genuine enjoyment of the evening's festivities. At Lucifer's right side stood Dia Solarin, wearing a dress in warm gold that seemed to make her red hair glow like flame. Her golden eyes reflected excitement mixed with something that might have been nervousness, as if she was still adjusting to being the center of attention in such a public setting. But it was Lucifer himself who commanded the most attention. He moved with his characteristic confidence, seemingly unbothered by the fact that arriving with 2 dates was causing considerable speculation throughout the ballroom. "Well," Cecilia observed with obvious amusement, "it appears we're not the only ones who decided to make this evening memorable." "Poor Lucifer," Rachel said with mock sympathy. "He's about to discover that being the subject of Academy gossip is less comfortable than he probably anticipated." I watched as Lucifer guided his companions toward a table on the opposite side of the ballroom, noting the way conversations seemed to follow in their wake. Siola appeared completely composed, as if attending formal events with shared escorts was perfectly natural. Dia looked less certain, though she was managing the attention with grace that spoke to inner strength. "I should probably go say hello," I said, starting to rise from my seat. "Later," Rose said firmly, catching my arm. "Right now, you owe me a dance, and I intend to collect." Her tone brooked no argument, and honestly, I had no desire to argue. The evening was young, and there would be plenty of time for social obligations later. For now, I wanted to focus on the 4 remarkable women who had chosen to spend this evening with me. "In that case," I said, standing and offering Rose my hand with appropriate formality, "may I have the honor of this dance?" Her smile was brilliant as she accepted, and I led her onto the dance floor as the orchestra began a waltz that seemed designed specifically for romantic evenings and memorable moments. As we began to move together across the polished floor, I caught glimpses of other couples joining us, including Lucifer with Siola, while Dia remained at their table with what appeared to be several curious classmates who had approached to make conversation. "Having second thoughts about our arrangement?" Rose asked softly as we turned through the dance's patterns. "Never," I replied honestly. Though I have to admit, Lucifer seems to be handling his own complex situation with impressive composure. He's had a good example to follow, Rose observed with gentle teasing. Someone who's been managing multiple relationships with remarkable success for quite some time now. The music swelled around us, and I found myself lost in the simple pleasure of dancing with someone I cared about deeply. Rose had become an excellent dancer over our years at the academy, and she moved with the kind of natural grace that made leading her feel effortless. When the song ended, I escorted her back to our table where Cecilia was already standing, clearly expecting her turn. "My dance, I believe?" she said with mock imperious authority. "Of course, Your Highness," I replied with equally mock formality, offering my arm. As we made our way back onto the dance floor, I caught sight of Lucifer now dancing with Dia, while Ciola conversed with what appeared to be several other students who had approached their table. The gossip mill was clearly in full operation, but both groups seemed to be handling the attention with remarkable poise. The evening was definitely living up to its promise of being memorable, and we had only just begun. Chapter 574, Fall Ball 2. Dancing with Cecilia was like partnering with controlled fire. Her movements were precise and powerful, reflecting the confidence that had made her such a formidable political figure despite her young age. Her crimson gown swirled around us as we moved through the more complex steps of what the orchestra had shifted to. A traditional slate-mark waltz that required both technical skill and perfect coordination between partners. "You've been practicing," I observed as she executed a particularly challenging turn with flawless technique. "Rachel insisted we all brush up on our formal dancing before tonight," Cecilia replied with a smile that held both amusement and satisfaction. "She said it would be embarrassing if the guild master's partners couldn't keep up with his skill level." "Rachel said that, did she?" I asked, spinning Cecilia gracefully before drawing her back into the dance's embrace. "She did, though I suspect her real motivation was ensuring that none of us had an unfair advantage during our respective dance time." Cecilia's red eyes sparkled with mischief. "We may be sharing you, Arthur, but we're still competitive about making the most of our individual moments." The honesty in her statement was both touching and amusing. Even in their remarkable cooperation, the four girls retained their individual personalities and desires. It was one of the things I found most endearing about our unconventional arrangement. They had found ways to support each other while still maintaining their own relationships with me. As we moved across the dance floor, I became increasingly aware of the attention we were drawing. Not just from other students, but from faculty members and even some visiting dignitaries who had been invited to observe the Academy's premier social event. Our group's arrival had clearly been noted and was undoubtedly being discussed in every corner of the ballroom. "Are you bothered by all the staring?" I asked Cecilia quietly. "Please," she replied with characteristic directness. "I'm a slate-mark princess attending a formal event with Arthur Nightingale. I'd be more surprised if people weren't staring." She paused, her expression growing more thoughtful. "Besides, look around. We're not the only ones providing entertainment for the Gossip Network tonight." She was right. Across the dance floor, Lucifer was now dancing with what appeared to be a very animated Dia, whose golden eyes were bright with laughter at something he had said. The sight was drawing almost as much attention as our own group, particularly from younger students who seemed fascinated by the idea that two of the Academy's most prominent figures had both arrived with multiple dates. "Poor Ciola," I observed, noting that she was once again seated at their table. Though she appeared to be engaged in serious conversation with several older students I recognized as top-ranked members of other classes. "Don't feel too sorry for her," Cecilia said with knowing amusement. "Ciola's probably enjoying the opportunity to make strategic social connections without the distraction of dancing. She's very practical about these things." The song came to an end, and I escorted Cecilia back to our table where Rachel was waiting with obvious anticipation. She had been watching our dance with the kind of analytical attention that suggested she was planning to outshine it during her own turn. "My turn," Rachel announced cheerfully, rising from her seat with fluid grace that made her sapphire blue gown seem to ripple like water. "Demanding tonight, aren't you?" I teased as I offered her my arm. "I prefer to think of it as enthusiastic," she replied with the warm smile that never failed to make my heart skip a beat. Besides, I have a reputation to maintain as the most skilled dancer among us. Is that a reputation you've assigned to yourself? I asked as we took our positions for what the orchestra was beginning, a livelier piece that would require more dynamic movement. Serafina assigned it to me, actually, Rachel said with obvious pleasure. She said my natural grace and years of formal training gave me an unfair advantage. And you're modest about this advantage, I suppose? Completely modest, she replied with mock solemnity, then proceeded to demonstrate exactly why Serafina's assessment had been accurate. Rachel was indeed an exceptional dancer. Her years of formal training showed in every movement, but more than that, she possessed an intuitive understanding of music and rhythm that made dancing with her feel like flying. We moved together across the floor with the kind of synchronization that only came from deep familiarity and mutual trust. "This is wonderful," she said softly as we spun through a particularly complex sequence. "I was worried that with everything else going on, we wouldn't get to have moments like this anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I thought I understood what she was referring to. "All the guild responsibilities, the political obligations, the way everyone seems to want a piece of your time and attention." She looked up at me with those deep blue eyes that seemed to hold starlight. "Sometimes I worry that we'll lose the simple pleasures in all the complexity." Her words touched on something I had been thinking about increasingly often. The demands on my time and energy were growing exponentially, and it was becoming harder to find opportunities for the kind of uncomplicated enjoyment that made life worth living. "That's exactly why tonight is important," I said, drawing her closer as the music shifted to a more intimate tempo. "No guild business, no political maneuvering, no strategic considerations. Just us, enjoying each other's company. Just us and about 300 other students," Rachel pointed out with gentle humor. "Details," I replied, earning a laugh that drew approving glances from nearby couples. As our dance continued, I found myself increasingly aware of the conversations happening around us. The Academy's social dynamics were always complex, but tonight they seemed particularly charged with speculation and curiosity. "Can't believe Arthur Nightingale actually came to an Academy event. For dates? How does someone even manage that logistically? Heard that Lucifer Windward brought two as well. What is it with these prodigies? Siola Moyong and Dia Solarin. Interesting choice for the Windward heir. Probably some kind of political alliance thing. You know how these noble families work." Rachel noticed my attention drifting toward the gossip and squeezed my hand gently. "Let them talk," she said quietly. "Half of them are just jealous that they don't have the courage to be honest about what they want. And the other half? The other half are taking notes for future reference," she replied with amusement. "You and Lucifer have probably just set new standards for Academy social events." When our dance ended, I was surprised to find that we had drawn a small audience. Several couples had stopped their own dancing to watch us, and there was even some scattered applause as we made our way back to our table. "Show-offs," Serafina observed with mock disapproval as we approached, though her ice-blue eyes held obvious warmth. "Just maintaining our reputations," Rachel replied cheerfully, settling back into her seat with obvious satisfaction. "In that case," Serafina said, rising with characteristic grace, "I suppose I should maintain mine as well." "And what reputation is that?" I asked, offering her my arm. "The most elegant dancer in the Academy," she replied with the kind of quiet confidence that made even bold statements seem like simple observations of fact. As we made our way back onto the dance floor, I caught sight of Lucifer's table and was amused to see that they had been joined by several other students, including Rinkagu and Jean Ashbluff. What had started as gossip curiosity was apparently evolving into genuine social interaction. "Lucifer seems to be handling his situation well," I observed to Serafina as we began dancing to what the orchestra was now playing. A slow, romantic piece that emphasized graceful movement over technical complexity. "He's had a good example to follow," Serafina replied, echoing Rose's earlier comment. "Though I suspect he's finding it more challenging than he anticipated." "What makes you say that?" "Look at Dia's face when she thinks no one is watching," Serafina said quietly. She's still nervous about the attention, and Ciola is being very careful to appear perfectly composed, which suggests she's working harder at it than usual. I followed her subtle indication and realized she was right. While both of Lucifer's companions were handling the evening with apparent grace, there were small signs of tension that became apparent once you knew to look for them. Should I be concerned about how my own companions are handling things? I asked. Serafina's smile was genuinely amused. Arthur, we've been preparing for this evening for weeks. We've discussed every possible scenario, planned our responses to various situations, and agreed on how to handle everything from gossip to direct questions about our arrangement. She paused, her ice-blue eyes meeting mine with warmth that belied her usually cool demeanor. We want to be here, all of us. This isn't a burden or an obligation. It's exactly how we chose to spend this evening. Her words carried a certainty that eased concerns I hadn't fully realized I was harboring. The complexity of our relationships sometimes made me worry that I was asking too much, expecting too much, or somehow taking advantage of their remarkable willingness to accommodate an unconventional situation. Thank you, I said quietly, for tonight, for your patience with everything, for making this work when it probably shouldn't. It works because we want it to work, Serafina replied simply, and because we trust you to make it worth the effort. As we continued dancing, moving together with the kind of synchronized grace that made complicated steps seem effortless, I found myself thinking about how fortunate I was to have found people who understood not just what I needed, but what I could offer in return. The evening was progressing exactly as I had hoped, filled with laughter, music, and the kind of simple pleasures that made all the complexity worthwhile. And judging by the continuing buzz of conversation throughout the ballroom, it was also providing enough entertainment value to keep the Academy's social networks busy for weeks to come. When our dance ended and I escorted Serafina back to our table, I was pleased to see that Rose, Rachel, and Cecilia were engaged in animated conversation with several other students who had approached during our absence. The sight confirmed what I had hoped, that our evening was being perceived not as something scandalous or inappropriate, but as an example of how mature individuals could handle complex relationships with grace and consideration. How are we doing on the gossip front? I asked as I took my seat. Quite well, actually, Cecilia replied with obvious satisfaction. Most people seem impressed rather than scandalized, though there are some interesting theories being proposed about the political implications of both your arrangement and Lucifer's. What kind of theories? The kind that give us far too much credit for strategic thinking, Rachel said with amusement. Apparently some people believe this is all part of some elaborate alliance-building exercise between major families. If only they knew, Rose added with gentle humor, that our most strategic consideration was making sure we all got adequate dance time. Chapter 575, Fall Ball 3. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the grand ballroom seemed to grow more relaxed and festive. The initial wave of gossip and speculation had settled into a more comfortable buzz of social interaction, and I noticed that both our group and Lucifer's had become focal points for broader conversations rather than subjects of whispered speculation. Arthur, a familiar voice called from behind me. I turned to find Lucifer approaching our table, looking remarkably composed despite the attention his own unconventional arrangement had been generating throughout the evening. His formal attire was impeccable, and he moved with the confident bearing that had always characterized him. Lucifer, I replied, rising to greet him properly. Enjoying the evening? Immensely, he said with genuine enthusiasm. Though I have to admit, I'm beginning to understand why you've seemed somewhat exhausted lately. Managing multiple social obligations simultaneously is more complex than I anticipated. I couldn't help but laugh at his candid assessment. It does require a certain amount of coordination, I agreed. How are Ciola and Dia handling everything? Better than I expected, honestly. Ciola is treating the entire evening as a networking opportunity, which suits her perfectly. And Dia? He glanced back toward their table with obvious affection. Dia is having the time of her life. I don't think she's stopped smiling since we arrived. Following his gaze, I could see that he was right. Dia was currently engaged in animated conversation with what appeared to be several students, her golden eyes bright with laughter. The nervousness I had noticed earlier seemed to have completely disappeared, replaced by genuine enjoyment of the social interaction. "I wanted to thank you," Lucifer continued, his tone becoming more serious, "for the example you've set with your own relationships. It made approaching this situation much easier when I could point to your success as evidence that unconventional arrangements could work." "I'm glad it helped," I replied, genuinely pleased that our experience had provided useful guidance. "Though I have to say, you seem to be handling everything with remarkable grace." "Practice," he said with amusement, "and very patient partners who were willing to help me figure out the logistics." As we talked, I became aware that our conversation was drawing attention from nearby tables. The sight of the Academy's two most prominent students discussing their shared approach to complex relationships was apparently fascinating to observers. "We're being watched," I observed quietly. "Constantly," Lucifer agreed with resignation. "I'm beginning to think we should charge admission for the entertainment value we're providing." Before I could respond, Ciola appeared at Lucifer's side with her characteristic quiet efficiency. She had changed from her earlier networking mode to something more personal, her golden eyes focused entirely on her companion. "The orchestra is about to play the evening's featured waltz," she said, her tone carrying subtle expectation. "I believe you promised me that particular dance." "Of course," Lucifer replied immediately, offering his arm with formal courtesy. "Arthur, would you excuse us?" "Naturally," I said, watching as they made their way back onto the dance floor. As I returned to my own table, I found that Rose, Rachel, Cecilia, and Serafina had been observing the interaction with obvious interest. "That was diplomatic," Cecilia observed with approval. "Establishing friendly relations while maintaining appropriate boundaries." "Lucifer's learning quickly," Rachel added, though I noticed Ciola made sure to reclaim his attention before their conversation could go on too long. "Smart woman," Serafina said with what might have been admiration. "She understands the importance of managing public perception." As we watched Lucifer and Ciola begin their dance, a formal waltz that showcased both their technical skill and their obvious comfort with each other, I found myself thinking about how the evening was evolving. What had started as two potentially scandalous social arrangements was becoming something more like a celebration of honest communication and mature relationship management. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Rose asked softly, settling into the chair beside me. "Just thinking about how well everything is going," I replied honestly. "I was worried that tonight might be awkward or complicated, but instead it feels natural," she suggested with understanding. "Exactly. Like this is just how things should be." "That's because it is how things should be," Cecilia said with characteristic directness. "We've spent months figuring out how to make this work, how to support each other while maintaining our individual relationships with you. Tonight is just the public expression of what we've already established privately." The orchestra's featured waltz was indeed magnificent, and I could see why it had been given special prominence in the evening's program. The melody was complex and romantic, requiring both technical skill and emotional connection between partners. Lucifer and Ciola were dancing beautifully, their movements perfectly synchronized and their expressions showing obvious enjoyment of both the music and each other's company. "They make a striking couple," Rachel observed with genuine appreciation. "They do," I agreed, then looked around our table with renewed gratitude. "Though I have to say, I'm quite satisfied with my own companions for the evening." "Flatterer," Serafina said with mock disapproval, though her ice-blue eyes held warmth. As the featured waltz concluded and couples began leaving the dance floor, I noticed that the evening's energy was shifting toward its peak. The initial formality was giving way to more relaxed social interaction, and the gossip networks had evolved into genuine conversations about relationships, politics, and the future. "Arthur." Dia Solarin appeared at our table with slightly flushed cheeks and obviously high spirits. "Could I borrow you for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss." I glanced at my companions, who all nodded encouragingly, before rising to follow Dia to a quieter area near the ballroom's edge. "Thank you," she said once we had relative privacy. "I wanted to tell you how grateful I am for everything you've done. Not just the obvious things, but the way you've shown that it's possible to be honest about complex feelings without causing chaos." "I'm not sure I follow," I replied, though I thought I understood what she was referring to. "Watching you navigate your relationships with Rose, Rachel, Cecilia, and Serafina gave me the courage to be honest with Lucifer about my own feelings," she explained. "And more importantly, it showed me that it was possible to be part of something unconventional without sacrificing dignity or respect." Her words carried weight that went beyond simple gratitude. Dia had been through tremendous trauma, losing everything she had known when her father's betrayal destroyed her previous life. Finding happiness and acceptance in her new circumstances was a significant achievement. "I'm glad our experience provided useful guidance," I said sincerely. "Though from what I've observed tonight, you and Ciola have done excellent work establishing your own approach to the situation." "We have," she agreed with obvious satisfaction. "And we have you to thank for showing us that it was possible." As we made our way back toward the main social area, I found myself thinking about the unexpected ways that personal choices could influence others. The decision to be honest about my own complex relationships had apparently provided a model that helped others find their own paths to happiness. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of music, dancing, and conversation. I made sure to spend additional time with each of my companions, sharing dances and private moments that reinforced the individual connections that made our group arrangement possible. Rose's warmth and growing confidence, Rachel's spirited enthusiasm, Cecilia's political insight delivered with genuine affection, Serafina's quiet wisdom and ethereal grace. Each brought something unique to our shared experience. Meanwhile, Lucifer's group seemed to be thriving as well. Ciola had successfully transformed the evening into a networking opportunity without sacrificing romantic attention, while Dia's obvious joy provided a counterbalance that kept things from becoming too calculated. Their success was drawing its own positive attention, contributing to a general atmosphere of acceptance for unconventional relationship arrangements. As the evening began to wind toward its conclusion, the orchestra announced the final dance, a slow, romantic piece designed to provide a perfect ending to the night's festivities. "Who gets the honor?" I asked my companions, suddenly faced with the need to choose among 4 equally deserving partners. "We discussed this earlier," Rose said with amusement. "All of us. All of you," I asked, confused about the logistics. "It's a slow dance," Cecilia explained patiently. "We take turns switching partners every minute or so. That way everyone gets a share of the final dance without anyone being left out." The solution was so perfectly them, practical, fair, and designed to ensure that no one felt excluded from the evening's most significant moment. The final dance was indeed perfect. I began with Rose, holding her close as we moved to the gentle rhythm of the orchestra's romantic melody. Her auburn hair caught the ballroom's magical lighting, and her brown eyes reflected complete contentment as we swayed together. After the agreed-upon interval, I smoothly transitioned to Cecilia, whose crimson gown swirled around us as we continued the dance. Her red eyes held warmth and satisfaction as she looked up at me, clearly pleased with how the evening had progressed. Rachel came next, her sapphire blue dress complementing the deeper blue of my formal jacket, as we moved together with the synchronized grace that had always characterized our interactions. Her smile was brilliant as she whispered something amusing about the other couple's attempts to coordinate similar partner exchanges. Finally, Serafina completed our rotation, her silver hair seeming to capture and reflect the ballroom's enchanted lighting as we finished the dance together. Her ice-blue eyes held depths of affection that she rarely showed in public settings, making the moment feel particularly precious. As the music came to its gentle conclusion and the evening officially ended, I found myself surrounded by 4 remarkable women who had made this night everything I had hoped it would be. Around us, other couples were beginning to make their farewells, and I could see Lucifer's group engaged in similar expressions of satisfaction with how their evening had unfolded. "Thank you," I said quietly, looking at each of my companions in turn. "For tonight, for your patience with everything, for making this work when it probably shouldn't." It works because we want it to work, Serafina replied, echoing her earlier words. And because we trust you to make it worth the effort. As we made our way out of the grand ballroom and back toward the dormitories, I reflected on how perfectly the evening had met my hopes for it. The fall ball had provided exactly what I had needed. A reminder that some things were worth preserving amid all the complexity and responsibility that defined most of my life. Chapter 576, Seven Circle Magic, 1. The Academy's library was quieter than usual on this particular afternoon, most students having fled to more recreational activities after the morning's challenging coursework. I sat at my usual table with Rachel. To my left sat the traditional Fuller Method materials, standard textbooks that any serious student of Seven Circle Magic would study. To my right, however, were two collections that represented the pinnacle of magical innovation. Detailed manuscripts on the Asterius method that Rachel had carefully transcribed and brought from her family's private archives, and the complete theoretical framework of the Alaric method that Charlotte had provided when she challenged me to create something entirely new. The fundamental difference, Rachel explained, settling beside me with her characteristic grace as she opened one of the Asterius texts, is in how we conceptualize the seventh circle itself. She pointed to a diagram that made my head spin just looking at it. Where Fuller's method showed a straightforward hierarchical arrangement, the Asterius approach displayed something that resembled a three-dimensional mandala, with interconnected spheres that seemed to pulse and flow in mathematical harmony. Fuller treats the seventh circle as an amplifier, Rachel continued, her golden hair catching the library's enchanted lighting. But that's primitive thinking. The Asterius method recognizes that the seventh circle should be a conductor, orchestrating harmony between all previous circles rather than simply boosting their output. I studied the complex equations that accompanied the diagram, already feeling the familiar intellectual vertigo that came with genuinely advanced magical theory. So instead of raw power multiplication, we achieve exponential efficiency through resonant optimization, she finished with obvious satisfaction. It's why Asterius spells can match Fuller's output while using less mana and casting faster. The elegance was undeniable, but so was the complexity. Each equation seemed to spawn three more variables, creating cascading systems that required not just mathematical skill but genuine intuitive understanding of magical principles. And the Alaric method? I asked, reaching for Charlotte's materials. Rachel's expression grew more serious. That's where things get really interesting. Charlotte's approach is completely different from both Fuller and Asterius. I opened the Alaric method texts and immediately understood her concern. Where both Fuller and Asterius focused on circle interaction and mana manipulation, the Alaric method seemed to approach seven-circle magic from an entirely different philosophical foundation. It's not about circles at all, I realized after scanning the introductory materials. Charlotte's treating magic as a field phenomenon. Exactly, Rachel confirmed. Instead of discrete circles that interact, the Alaric method views magical energy as a continuous field that can be shaped and focused through theoretical constructs that only resemble traditional circles. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a different technique, it was a fundamentally different understanding of how magic worked at the deepest level. No wonder Charlotte suggested I try to synthesize these approaches, I muttered, already feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what I was attempting. She wants me to reconcile three completely different magical philosophies. Not reconcile, Rachel corrected gently. Transcend. She thinks you can find a way to combine the best aspects of all three while avoiding their individual limitations. Over the following weeks, we established a routine that balanced our academy obligations with intensive research. Mornings were dedicated to our regular coursework. My individualized curriculum of deep dark theory, pure light applications, six-circle development, and enhanced aura manipulation, along with Professor Nero's increasingly challenging practical missions. Afternoons found us back in the library, where Rachel proved invaluable in translating her family's complex theoretical framework into concepts I could actually work with. Her explanations transformed the abstract mathematics of the Asterius method into comprehensible principles, though the work remained monumentally challenging. The key insight of the Asterius method, she explained during one particularly intensive session, is that the seventh circle doesn't just manage the previous six, It creates a feedback loop that allows the entire system to adapt and optimize in real time. Adaptive optimization, I repeated, trying to internalize the concept. So Asterius spells essentially learn and improve as they're being cast? Within limits, Rachel confirmed. It's not true artificial intelligence, but there's a pseudo-cognitive element that responds to changing magical conditions. That's why experienced Asterius practitioners can achieve effects that seem impossible based on the raw mana investment. Meanwhile, my study of the Alaric method revealed an approach that was both more abstract and more fundamentally radical. Charlotte's theoretical framework treated magic not as discrete effects but as manipulations of an underlying field that permeated reality itself. She's essentially arguing that all magic is field manipulation. I explained to Rachel one evening as we reviewed my notes. Spells, circles, even individual magical effects. They're all just different ways of creating localized distortions in this universal magical field. Which would explain why the Alaric method is so theoretically elegant, Rachel observed. If you're working with the fundamental structure of magical reality rather than trying to impose artificial constructs on it. But also why it's so incredibly difficult to master, I added with rueful appreciation. Understanding field dynamics at that level requires mathematical sophistication that most mages never develop. Our evening study sessions were frequently interrupted by visits from our dormitory companions. Rose would appear with tea and gentle reminders to take breaks, while Cecilia offered political insights into how various magical families guarded their theoretical secrets. Serafina provided analytical perspectives that helped me identify patterns I might have missed. You're trying to solve 3 different puzzles simultaneously, she observed during one such visit, studying the equations scattered across our table. Have you considered that the solution might require abandoning traditional circle-based thinking entirely? Her comment sparked something in my mind, a possibility I hadn't fully considered. What if, I said slowly, instead of trying to improve on existing methods, I approached this from first principles? Used what I understand about all 3 methods to ask what 7-circle magic should accomplish, rather than how existing methods try to accomplish it. Rachel's eyes lit up with interest. You mean design the ideal magical framework and then figure out how to implement it? Exactly. Fuller, Asterius, and Alaric all started with existing magical understanding and tried to extend it. But what if we started with the desired outcome and worked backward? It was an audacious approach, but as I began sketching preliminary ideas, I realized it might be the only way to truly synthesize such different methodologies. You're talking about magical engineering, Serafina observed with something approaching awe. Designing magic like Charlotte designs her research projects, with specific goals and optimal solutions rather than traditional approaches. Something like that. I agreed, though even I wasn't entirely sure where this line of thinking would lead. As the first month of intensive study drew to a close, I found myself developing ideas that didn't quite fit any existing magical framework. The combination of theoretical knowledge from 3 revolutionary methods was generating insights that seemed to transcend their individual limitations. If I could successfully create a 7-circle method that combined the best aspects of Fuller's stability, Asterius's adaptive elegance, and Alaric's fundamental sophistication, it wouldn't just advance my own development. It could revolutionize magical theory itself. The first month had laid the foundation. Now came the real challenge, transforming theoretical understanding into practical innovation. Ready for the next phase? Rachel asked as we prepared to leave the library that evening. As ready as anyone can be for attempting the impossible, I replied with a confidence I was beginning to actually feel. The theoretical groundwork was complete. Now it was time to begin the real work of creation. Chapter 577. 7-Circle Magic. 2. The second month of my research began with a fundamental shift in approach. Instead of continuing to study the 3 methods separately, I started what Rachel dubbed theoretical archaeology, deconstructing each approach to its core principles and examining how they might be rebuilt into something entirely new. You're essentially reverse engineering centuries of magical innovation, she observed as we spread our materials across multiple tables in the Academy Library's most secluded study room. And doing it with the best theoretical minds in our year, Cecilia added as she joined us, her arms full of additional texts from the Slatemark Empire's magical archives. Her red eyes sparkled with intellectual excitement as she surveyed our expanded workspace. I've brought some comparative analysis materials that might help with the synthesis work. Rose arrived shortly after, carrying a service tray with tea and light refreshments. I thought you might need sustenance for what looks like another marathon study session, she said with gentle amusement, though her brown eyes showed genuine interest in the complex diagrams covering our tables. Rose has been helping with organizational systems, Rachel explained as we welcomed our expanded research group. Her approach to information management has been invaluable for tracking the relationships between different theoretical concepts. It's like managing guild logistics, Rose said with a smile, except instead of coordinating people and resources, I'm helping coordinate ideas and mathematical relationships. The Fuller method, I realized, was built on the principle of hierarchical amplification, each circle building upon the previous ones in a structured, predictable pattern. It was reliable and stable, but ultimately limited by its rigid architecture. The Asterius method embraced adaptive harmony, creating systems that could respond and optimize in real time. This gave it tremendous flexibility and efficiency, but at the cost of theoretical complexity that made it nearly impossible to fully predict or control. The Alaric method approached magic as field manipulation, working with the fundamental structure of magical reality itself. This made it incredibly powerful and theoretically elegant, but required mathematical sophistication that put it beyond most practitioners' reach. Each method sacrifices something to achieve its strengths, I explained as our expanded group reviewed my analysis. Fuller trades flexibility for stability, Asterius trades predictability for adaptability, Alaric trades accessibility for fundamental power. So your synthesis would need to achieve stability, adaptability, and fundamental power without sacrificing any of them? Cecilia asked with obvious skepticism, her political mind immediately grasping the complexity of what I was attempting. That's the theory, I confirmed, though I was becoming increasingly aware of how challenging this would be in practice. The mathematical challenges alone are staggering, Rose observed, studying the equations with surprising insight. You're essentially trying to solve optimization problems that each method approaches differently. The breakthrough came during my third week of synthesis work. What if the key to synthesizing the three methods wasn't in their magical frameworks, but in their underlying mathematical principles? Each method uses different mathematical tools. I explained to Rachel as I began sketching new diagrams. Fuller relies on hierarchical algebra, Asterius uses dynamic systems theory, Alaric employs field equations. But what if we could create a mathematical framework that incorporated all three approaches? Rachel's eyes widened as she followed my reasoning. You're talking about creating new mathematics specifically for magical applications. Not entirely new, I clarified. More like a unified mathematical language that can express concepts from all three methods simultaneously. The work that followed was some of the most intellectually demanding I'd ever attempted. We spent long hours developing what I came to call synthetic magical mathematics. Equations that could describe hierarchical amplification, adaptive optimization, and field manipulation within a single theoretical framework. This is insane, Rachel muttered during one particularly challenging session, her golden hair disheveled from running her hands through it in frustration. You're essentially inventing a new branch of applied mathematics. With help from some of the best theoretical minds in the academy, Cecilia added, her own notes covering several pages of complex derivations. My experience with Slatemark magical theory is providing some interesting parallels to what Arthur's developing. The organizational framework is helping too, Rose contributed, having created an intricate system for tracking the relationships between different theoretical concepts. I can see patterns in how the three methods interconnect that might not be obvious when you're focused on the mathematics. Magical mathematics has always been its own discipline, I pointed out, though I was equally overwhelmed by the complexity of what we were attempting. The first major breakthrough came when I realized that the three methods weren't actually incompatible. They were describing the same underlying phenomena from different perspectives. Fuller's hierarchical amplification was actually a simplified version of field manipulation, while Asterius's adaptive optimization was a special case of dynamic field adjustment. They're all field theories, I told our expanded research group with growing excitement. Fuller just doesn't realize it because he's working with discrete approximations, and Asterius masks it behind biological metaphors. But at the fundamental level, they're all manipulating the same magical field that Charlotte describes explicitly. So your synthesis would be a complete field theory that incorporates the best aspects of each approach? Rachel asked, her mathematical intuition immediately grasping the implications. That's brilliant, Cecilia added, her red eyes bright with understanding. Instead of trying to force 3 different methodologies to work together, you're revealing their underlying unity. And the organizational structure supports it, Rose observed, pointing to her carefully constructed relationship diagrams. When you map the connections properly, you can see how each method is really just a different interface to the same underlying system. Exactly. A unified framework that can operate in hierarchical mode when stability is needed, adaptive mode when flexibility is required, and direct field manipulation when maximum power is necessary. The theoretical framework took another 2 weeks to develop, involving mathematical concepts that pushed the boundaries of my academy education. Rachel's brilliance proved invaluable during this phase, her natural mathematical talent helping translate abstract concepts into workable equations. The key insight, I explained as we finalized the basic framework, is that instead of choosing between stability, adaptability, and power, we can design a system that shifts between operational modes depending on requirements. Like a magical transmission system, Rachel observed with obvious appreciation for the elegance of the solution. Exactly, the same underlying engine, but with different configurations optimized for different purposes. As word of our research spread through the Academy's informal networks, we began receiving visits from curious classmates and even some faculty members. Professor Nero appeared one afternoon, ostensibly to check on our progress but clearly interested in what we were developing. Ambitious work, he observed after reviewing our theoretical diagrams. Though I notice you're focusing entirely on the mathematical framework. Have you given thought to practical implementation? The question highlighted a challenge I'd been avoiding. Creating the theory was one thing, actually casting spells using these principles was something else entirely. That's the next phase, I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure how to approach it. Might I suggest starting with simple applications? Professor Nero recommended. Your current six-circle capabilities provide an excellent foundation for testing theoretical concepts. His suggestion proved invaluable. Instead of trying to immediately implement full seven-circle magic, I began experimenting with applying my unified framework to enhance existing spells. The results were remarkable. By treating my six-circle spells as simplified field manipulations rather than discrete magical effects, I achieved significant improvements in both efficiency and power output. Your pure light applications are getting stronger, Serafina observed during one of our evening study sessions. There's something different about the way you're channeling energy. I'm using field optimization principles to improve mana flow patterns, I explained, demonstrating an enhanced light spell that required noticeably less energy than traditional approaches. It's beautiful, Rose added with genuine appreciation. The energy patterns look more natural somehow. Her observation was particularly insightful. My enhanced spells did feel more natural, as if they were working with magical principles rather than forcing them into artificial constructs. Meanwhile, my work on developing Sword Heart had been progressing steadily. The enhanced understanding of energy flow and field manipulation that came from my magical research was translating directly into improved sword techniques. Your resonance is becoming remarkably stable, Clara observed during one of our occasional coffee conversations. Are you applying magical theory to your sword work? Something like that, I confirmed. The same principles that govern magical fields seem to apply to weapon-based energy channeling. Interesting, she said with her characteristic drowsy insight. Most people try to keep their magical and martial development separate, but you're finding connections between them. Her comment highlighted something I'd been sensing but hadn't fully articulated. My approach to magical and martial development was becoming increasingly integrated, with insights from one discipline enhancing the other. As the second month drew to a close, I found myself with a theoretical framework that showed genuine promise and practical applications that demonstrated real improvements over traditional methods. But the ultimate test still lay ahead, attempting to actually implement seven-circle magic using my unified approach. "Are you ready for the next phase?" Rachel asked as we prepared to leave the library after another productive session. "Ready to attempt something that might revolutionize magical theory or fail spectacularly?" I replied with a mixture of confidence and apprehension. "Those aren't mutually exclusive outcomes," she pointed out with gentle humor. "You're approaching something significant," Luna observed as we made our way back to the dormitories. "I can sense the way your understanding is reshaping itself. It feels like I'm seeing magic from a completely different perspective," I replied mentally. "Not just as spells or techniques, but as interactions with fundamental forces." The foundation was complete. Now came the real test, putting theory into practice. Chapter 578. Seven-Circle Magic, 3. The third month began with a startling realization during one of my martial training sessions. As I practiced advanced sword forms in the Academy's combat facility, I felt something fundamental shift in my energy patterns, something that made my heart race with both excitement and apprehension. "Your sword resonance is approaching critical mass," Jean observed with obvious amazement as he watched me complete a series of forms that seemed to bend reality around them. "Arthur, you're standing at the edge of Sword Heart." He was right. I could feel it. The wall that separated integration rank from ascendant rank was visible in my mind's eye, close enough that I could almost reach out and touch it. My sword work had evolved to the point where one more breakthrough, one moment of martial enlightenment, would carry me across that legendary threshold. But that was exactly the problem. "I need to stop," I said, deliberately pulling back from the technique that would have pushed me over the edge. The effort required enormous willpower. Every instinct screamed at me to take that final step, to claim the power and recognition that came with ascendant rank. "Stop," Jean asked with genuine confusion. "Arthur, you're about to achieve something that most martial artists spend decades pursuing. Why would you hold back?" "Because I'm not ready," I replied, sheathing my sword with hands that trembled slightly from the effort of restraint. "If I scale the wall now through pure martial advancement, I'll lock myself into a primarily sword-based path to ascendant rank. My magical development would be constrained by that choice." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You want to achieve integrated advancement, magical and martial enlightenment simultaneously." "Exactly. I've been developing both paths in parallel for a reason. If I can cross the wall using both approaches at once, I might achieve capabilities that exceed what either discipline could provide alone." It was one of the most difficult decisions I'd ever made. The promise of Sword Heart was tantalizingly close, representing power and capabilities that few people ever achieved. But I could sense that accepting it now would somehow limit my magical potential. "That's either remarkably disciplined or remarkably foolish," Jean observed with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Enlightenment opportunities don't present themselves on convenient schedules." His warning echoed my own fears, but I trusted my instincts about timing. Both my magical research and my martial training were approaching readiness for fundamental breakthroughs, and something deep inside suggested that synchronizing them would create possibilities neither alone could achieve. When I explained my decision to our research group that evening, their reactions were mixed but ultimately supportive. "You're gambling everything on a theoretical possibility," Rachel said with obvious concern. "If your integrated development theory is wrong, you could end up missing both opportunities. But if it's right," Cecilia added thoughtfully, "you could achieve something unprecedented in the history of magical and martial development." "The documentation supports the integrated approach," Rose observed, reviewing her detailed records. "Your progress in both areas has been parallel and mutually reinforcing throughout the entire development period." Their analysis reinforced my confidence in the decision, but it also highlighted the urgency of completing my magical preparation. If I was going to attempt simultaneous breakthrough, the Nightingale method needed to be ready for activation the moment enlightenment struck. The remaining weeks of the month were spent in intensive refinement of the theoretical framework. Working with Rachel, Cecilia, and Rose, I focused on perfecting every aspect of the unified system, ensuring that it would be ready for immediate implementation once I achieved the necessary insight. The modular approach is elegant, Rachel observed as we reviewed the final equations. Instead of trying to run all three methodologies simultaneously, you've created a system that can shift between operational modes seamlessly. It's like a sophisticated engine, Cecilia added, her experience with magical technology providing valuable perspective. Multiple configurations available instantly, all optimized for different requirements. And the documentation is comprehensive, Rose confirmed with satisfaction. Anyone studying this framework will have complete understanding of both theoretical foundations and practical implementation. The Nightingale method, as we had come to call it, was indeed complete. It represented a synthesis of Fuller's hierarchical stability, Asterius's adaptive optimization, and Alaric's fundamental field manipulation, unified through mathematical principles that treated all three as expressions of the same underlying magical reality. More importantly, it was designed to integrate seamlessly with Marshall energy manipulation, treating magical and physical enhancement as complementary rather than competing approaches to power development. You've essentially created a new paradigm for advancement, Professor Nero observed when I presented the completed framework for his review. This isn't just an improvement on existing methods. It's a fundamental reconceptualization of how advanced development should work. The integration potential is particularly remarkable, he continued, studying the equations that described magical and Marshall synthesis. If your theory is correct, someone using this method could achieve capabilities that transcend traditional disciplinary boundaries. That's the goal, I confirmed, to create an approach that doesn't force practitioners to choose between magical and Marshall development, but instead allows them to pursue both simultaneously for enhanced results. But theoretical completion was only half the challenge. The other half was psychological and spiritual, achieving the enlightenment necessary to activate the framework and cross the wall to ascendant rank. Enlightenment can't be forced, Serafina observed with her characteristic analytical precision when I discussed my readiness with her. It emerges from deep understanding combined with perfect timing. And you feel close to that understanding? She asked. Very close, I replied honestly. I can sense the shape of the insight I need, even if I can't quite grasp it yet. It's like seeing the solution to a complex problem just at the edge of vision. You're approaching the threshold, Luna confirmed during one of our mental conversations. I can feel the way your consciousness is shifting, preparing for the breakthrough. How will I know when it's time? I asked. You'll know, she replied with certainty. When all the pieces align, theoretical understanding, practical readiness, martial preparation, and spiritual insight, the moment will be unmistakable. As the third month drew to a close, I found myself in a unique position. My sword work was poised on the very edge of Sword Heart, requiring only a moment of martial enlightenment to trigger ascendant rank advancement. The Nightingale method was theoretically complete and ready for activation. My understanding of integrated development had reached the point where breakthrough seemed not just possible but inevitable. All that remained was the crucial moment of enlightenment, the instant when everything would click into place and allow me to step across the wall using an approach that had never been attempted before. You're like a spring wound to maximum tension, Clara observed during one of our final coffee conversations of the development period. All the preparation is complete, but you're waiting for exactly the right moment to release all that accumulated potential. That's exactly how it feels, I agreed. Everything is ready, but the final trigger has to come naturally. And when it does? She asked with gentle curiosity. When it does, everything changes, I replied with quiet confidence. The Nightingale method becomes active, Sword Heart becomes accessible, and I achieve ascendant rank through integrated development rather than single discipline advancement. The 3-month intensive development period was complete. The theoretical framework was finished, the martial preparation was ready, and the conditions for breakthrough were perfectly aligned. Now came the most challenging part, waiting for the moment of enlightenment that would transform 3 months of preparation into revolutionary reality. Soon, Luna observed as I settled into meditation that final evening. I can sense that the moment is approaching. I hope so, I replied, because I don't think I can maintain this balance much longer. You won't have to, she assured me. When enlightenment comes, it will feel like the most natural thing in the world. All this preparation will suddenly make perfect sense. The foundation was complete. The moment was approaching, and when it arrived, I would be ready to step into entirely new territory of human potential. The waiting was almost over. Chapter 579. Breaking Through the Wall, 1. The training hall was quiet, save for the faint hum of mana that filled the air. The crystalline walls shimmered softly, reflecting the ambient magical energy that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. I stood in the center of the room, my sword in hand, feeling the weight of 3 months of intensive preparation settling around me like a familiar cloak. This was it, the moment when everything would either come together in perfect harmony or collapse spectacularly. You're ready? Luna's voice whispered in my mind, carrying a certainty that helped steady my nerves. All the pieces are aligned. Trust in what you've built. I took a steadying breath, closing my eyes to center myself. The Nightingale method existed as a complete theoretical framework in my consciousness, waiting for the moment of enlightenment that would transform it from abstract knowledge into living reality. My sword resonance had reached the very edge of something profound, requiring only the slightest push to cross that legendary threshold into sword heart. But this wasn't about achieving either breakthrough individually. This was about something unprecedented, simultaneous magical and martial ascension that would carry me to ascendant rank through integrated development rather than single discipline mastery. Focus? I murmured to myself, feeling the familiar weight of my blade.
No hesitaste.
No doubt. I remained still, letting my consciousness expand to encompass the sword in my hands. The weapon wasn't just steel and energy anymore. I could feel my connection to it deepening, expanding beyond the sword resonance I had cultivated for months. The boundary between wielder and weapon began to blur as something fundamental shifted within me. As this transformation began, I simultaneously started constructing the theoretical framework for seven-circle magic in my consciousness. Not the traditional Fuller method, nor the Asterius approach, nor even Charlotte's Alaric system, but the Nightingale method that synthesized all three while transcending their individual limitations. The first 6 circles formed with remarkable ease, their energy patterns optimized according to the unified mathematical principles I had developed. Hierarchical amplification provided the stable foundation, adaptive optimization ensured smooth energy flow, and field manipulation techniques allowed for precise control. But the 7th circle, that was where the true innovation lay. Instead of simply adding another layer to the existing structure, the 7th circle in the Nightingale method operated as a consciousness interface, a metasystem that could dynamically reconfigure the previous 6 circles based on spell requirements and environmental conditions. The sword in my hands pulsed with energy as my connection to it transcended mere resonance. I felt the weapon becoming something more, not just an extension of my will, but a living conduit that existed in perfect harmony with my consciousness. The sword resonance I had cultivated was crystallizing into something far more profound. Sword heart. Now, Luna urged as I felt both the theoretical construct and the sword transformation approaching completion. Let understanding and intuition merge. In that moment, everything clicked. The sword wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of my soul, a focus for the same field manipulation principles that governed my magical development. The energy patterns flowing through my martial connection weren't separate from magic. They were expressions of the same fundamental forces that the Nightingale method was designed to harness. The revelation struck like lightning. Magic and martial arts weren't different disciplines that could be practiced simultaneously. They were complementary aspects of a unified approach to energy manipulation. The theoretical framework I had created wasn't just a method for casting 7-circle spells. It was a comprehensive system for integrated advancement that applied equally to magical and physical enhancement. As this understanding crystallized, I felt the wall that separated integration rank from ascendant rank suddenly become visible in my consciousness. Not as an obstacle to overcome, but as a threshold to cross through perfect synthesis of knowledge, will, and technique. My connection to the sword completed its transformation, sword resonance evolving into true sword heart. The weapon blazed with brilliant light, while the Nightingale method's seventh circle pulsed in perfect synchronization, creating a feedback loop that amplified both magical and martial energies exponentially. The world responded. The air rippled as if reality itself was acknowledging the fundamental change taking place. My sword glowed with energy that seemed to bend reality around it, while my newly formed sword heart resonated with power that transcended normal martial arts. Simultaneously, the seventh circle of my magical construct engaged fully, creating a harmony between sword and spell that neither discipline could achieve alone. And then the wall yielded. I felt it in every fiber of my being as I scaled the barrier between ranks and stepped into the realm of the Ascendant. The surge of power was overwhelming. Not just raw energy, but a fundamental transformation that affected every aspect of my existence. My mana core evolved, its capacity and efficiency increasing by orders of magnitude. The first body metamorphosis began immediately, muscles and nerves restructuring themselves to handle capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. Even my mind seemed to expand, able to process information and energy patterns with unprecedented clarity. But most significantly, deep within my consciousness, two new presences manifested simultaneously. The first was my sword heart, not just a metaphysical construct, but a living system that could gather and compress mana, transforming it into astral energy with perfect efficiency. It pulsed with steady rhythm, resonating with the enhanced energy flows of my transformed body. The second was the active matrix of the Nightingale method itself. No longer just theoretical knowledge, it had become an integral part of my magical consciousness, ready to implement seven-circle spells with capabilities that surpassed any traditional approach. I lowered myself into a lotus position as the transformation continued, centering myself while the metamorphosis ran its course. This wasn't just physical evolution, it was fundamental change that affected every aspect of my being. As the initial surge of power stabilized, I became aware of something extraordinary happening in the space around me. The air shimmered, taking on an almost crystalline quality, and I felt a familiar presence manifesting in physical form. Arthur. Luna's voice came not from my mind but from directly in front of me. I opened my eyes to see a small figure materializing from motes of silver light, a child who appeared to be perhaps 5 years old, with hair that flowed like liquid amethyst and seemed to hold starlight and eyes that reflected depths of ancient wisdom in their golden orbs. Her form was delicate but radiated power that made the air itself thrum with energy.
Luna.
I asked, though I already knew the answer. She smiled, an expression both childlike and infinitely wise. Your advancement to Ascendant rank has weakened the seals that bound me to purely mental manifestation. I can appear physically now, though still in limited form. Her voice carried the same warmth and intelligence I had grown accustomed to, but hearing it spoken aloud rather than telepathically was startling. She looked exactly as I had always imagined she might, ancient wisdom in the form of innocent youth. The Nightingale method, she continued, walking closer with steps that barely seemed to touch the ground, is more significant than you realized. By creating a unified framework for magical and martial development, you've essentially discovered a new path to power that transcends traditional limitations. As if responding to her words, I felt another presence stirring within my consciousness. Erebus, my lich companion who had been bound by limiting seals since our initial contract, was experiencing his own transformation. Dark energy swirled in the corner of the training hall, coalescing into a tall figure wreathed in shadows and ethereal flames. Where before Erebus had been constrained to the power level of a basic undead, now his true capabilities as a lich were finally unleashed. Master. His voice resonated with newfound authority and power. The limiters have been removed. I can access my full abilities now. The difference was immediately apparent. Erebus's magical aura had intensified dramatically, dark energy radiating from his form with barely contained force. His knowledge of necromantic arts, previously restricted, was now fully available. Even his physical manifestation appeared more solid, more real, as if my advancement had somehow anchored him more firmly to this realm. "This is just the beginning," I said, marveling at the changes surrounding me. "When I reach immortal rank, we can work on evolving you into an archlich." Erebus's hooded form inclined in acknowledgement. "I await that day with great anticipation, Master. The power of an archlich would serve your ambitions well." Luna observed this exchange with obvious interest. "Your connection to both magical and martial disciplines, combined with unique companions like Erebus and our own bond, creates possibilities that extend far beyond traditional advancement paths." Standing up from my meditation posture, I took stock of my transformed capabilities. The power coursing through me wasn't just quantitatively greater than before, it was qualitatively different. I could feel the Nightingale Method's unified framework operating in harmony with my enhanced sword heart, creating synergies that neither traditional magic nor pure martial arts could achieve. "How strong am I now?" I asked, curious about the practical implications of my integrated breakthrough. "Stronger than any newly advanced ascendant has a right to be," Luna replied with amusement. "Your simultaneous magical and martial advancement has placed you somewhere between low and mid-ascendant rank immediately. Most practitioners require months to achieve such stability." Erebus's dark form nodded agreement. "Your magical capabilities, enhanced by my unrestricted knowledge and power, exceed what most ascendant rank mages achieve, even after significant development." The implications were staggering. By refusing to choose between magical and martial advancement, by creating an integrated approach that treated both as expressions of the same underlying principles, I had achieved capabilities that surpassed traditional methods in every measurable way. Chapter 580. Breaking Through the Wall, 2. I felt my sword heart pulse within me, a steady rhythm that seemed to resonate with the mana coursing through my transformed body. With just a thought, I could sense its new potential, the ability to gather and compress mana, transforming it into astral energy with an efficiency that surpassed anything I had previously imagined possible. It was like having access to an entirely new dimension of power. But the sword heart was only half of the equation. The Nightingale Method's 7-circle framework had finally bridged the gap in my spellcasting capabilities, giving me access to magical techniques that traditional approaches couldn't match. While my martial development had been progressing rapidly, the magical advancement through integrated enlightenment had created perfect balance between both disciplines. The two paths now felt less like separate approaches and more like harmonious aspects of a unified system, threads of the same tapestry that strengthened each other rather than competing for dominance. And then there were the dual partial metamorphoses. There were no adequate words to describe the transformation. Unlike traditional ascendants who experienced complete metamorphosis in a single aspect, my integrated approach had triggered something unprecedented, simultaneous partial transformation of both body and mind. My body felt fundamentally evolved, though not to the full extent that pure warriors achieved. Every fiber of muscle, every ligament, every nerve had been enhanced to operate at superior efficiency, granting me perhaps 70% of the physical advantages that dedicated body aspect fighters gained at this rank. The superior endurance, enhanced regeneration, and pure physical capability were mine to command, though in a more balanced form. Simultaneously, my mind had undergone its own partial metamorphosis. My ability to process complex information, manipulate magical energies, and comprehend abstract patterns had been enhanced significantly. Again, roughly 70% of what pure mind aspect mages typically achieved. The mental clarity and expanded consciousness were remarkable, yet harmonized with my physical enhancements rather than overwhelming them. But experiencing both transformations simultaneously revealed depths that academic knowledge couldn't convey. I wasn't just partially stronger and partially more intelligent. I was operating according to fundamentally different principles entirely. The synergy between the dual partial metamorphoses created capabilities that seemed to exceed what either complete transformation might have provided alone. "The resonance between your magical and martial development is remarkable," Luna observed, her childlike form studying me with ancient eyes. "Most ascendant rankers achieve their advancement through single-discipline focus, experiencing complete metamorphosis in either body or mind. Your integrated approach has created something entirely new, dual partial metamorphoses that reinforce each other. She walked closer, her steps barely disturbing the air around her. Despite appearing as a 5-year-old child, her presence radiated power that made reality itself seem more vivid and substantial. Your transformation pattern is unprecedented, she continued. Instead of achieving full metamorphosis in one aspect like traditional ascendance, you've gained partial enhancement in both body and mind simultaneously. The synergy this creates places you at capabilities equivalent to mid-ascendant rank immediately, despite neither transformation being complete. Erebus, now manifesting his full power as an unleashed lich, added his own assessment. Master, the necromantic energies I can now access complement your enhanced capabilities perfectly. Together, we represent a force that exceeds the sum of our individual powers. I flexed my fingers, marveling at the balanced precision and strength flowing through them. The dual transformation had been more comprehensive than I had anticipated, affecting not just raw power but every aspect of how I interacted with both magical and physical forces. Neither metamorphosis was complete, yet together they created capabilities that felt more refined and versatile than either alone might have provided. It will take approximately 4 months to fully stabilize these dual partial metamorphoses, I said, mostly thinking aloud as I evaluated my new capabilities. At that point, I should have capabilities equivalent to a solidly established mid-ascendant rank practitioner, despite technically having incomplete transformations in both aspects. 4 months to stabilize dual partial metamorphoses? Luna's expression showed amusement mixed with something that might have been concern. Most newly advanced ascendants require a year or more to achieve such stability with their single complete metamorphosis. Your integrated development continues to exceed normal parameters. Why would I settle for normal parameters? I replied with a slight smile. As we discussed the implications of my transformation, I became aware of subtle changes in how I perceived the world around me. Colors seemed more vivid, magical energies more distinct, and the underlying patterns that governed both physical and metaphysical phenomena more comprehensible. The enhanced mental processing from my partial mind metamorphosis worked in harmony with the improved sensory acuity from my partial body metamorphosis. The enhanced perception is a unique benefit of your dual partial metamorphoses, Luna explained, apparently sensing my observations. By developing both physical and mental capabilities simultaneously, even in incomplete form, you've created a synergistic enhancement that pure specialists never achieve. Each partial transformation amplifies the benefits of the other. I took out my phone, its sleek surface lighting up as I composed messages to Rachel, Cecilia, and Rose. They needed to know about my breakthrough, and I wanted to share this moment with the people who had been instrumental in making it possible. The response was immediate, all 3 agreeing to meet at our usual cafe near the academy. Their excitement was palpable even through text messages, and I found myself looking forward to seeing their reactions to the changes. The cafe wasn't far, its warm atmosphere providing a welcome contrast to the intensity of the training hall. As I settled into a seat near the window, I noticed how differently I experienced even simple sensations like the aroma of coffee or the texture of the furniture. Everything seemed more vivid, more immediate, a result of the balanced enhancement to both my physical senses and mental processing capabilities. Luna had gone back into the seal, explaining that maintaining physical manifestation in public spaces would draw unwanted attention. Erebus had simply faded back into the shadows, though I could sense his presence lurking just at the edge of perception. It wasn't long before they arrived. Rachel burst through the cafe entrance first, her golden hair catching the light and her sapphire eyes immediately focusing on me with laser intensity. Cecilia followed with her characteristic poise, though her red eyes showed obvious curiosity. Rose entered last, her brown eyes warm with anticipation. For a moment, they all stood there, clearly sensing that something fundamental had changed even before I spoke a word. "You did it?" Cecilia said simply, her voice carrying a mixture of admiration and something that might have been awe. "You actually broke through." "Not just broke through," Rachel added, sliding into a seat across from me, "but completely shattered expectations in the process. I can feel the power radiating from you. This isn't normal ascendant rank advancement. Rose settled beside me, her presence warm and comforting. The integrated approach worked? Better than I had hoped, I confirmed. The Nightingale method proved to be everything we theorized and more. By achieving magical and martial enlightenment simultaneously, I triggered dual partial metamorphoses that have granted me capabilities exceeding traditional single-discipline advancement, despite neither transformation being technically complete. "Show us," Cecilia said with obvious eagerness. I smiled, extending my hand palm up above the table. With barely a thought, I activated a simple 7-circle spell using the Nightingale method's framework. Light coalesced above my palm, but it wasn't ordinary magical illumination. It was structured light that shifted through multiple configurations, demonstrating adaptive optimization, hierarchical amplification, and field manipulation principles in sequence. "And your martial development?" Rose asked. In response, I simply allowed a fraction of my sword heart's energy to manifest visibly. The air around my hand shimmered with concentrated astral energy, far more stable and efficient than anything I had achieved at integration rank. "Incredible," Cecilia murmured. "You've essentially achieved dual partial mastery simultaneously. The synergy between incomplete body and mind metamorphoses has created capabilities that might exceed complete single-aspect transformation." "The implications are staggering," Rachel added, her brilliant mind clearly working through the theoretical possibilities. Rose leaned closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "How do you feel?" "The transformation must have been intense. Like I've become something fundamentally different," I replied honestly. "The dual partial metamorphoses have created a balance I never expected. I'm not as physically enhanced as a pure warrior, nor as mentally augmented as a pure mage, but the combination creates capabilities that feel more versatile and refined than either extreme might provide. It's exhilarating and slightly overwhelming." "The exhilaration will stabilize," Cecilia observed with the voice of experience. "But the sense of operating by different rules, that's permanent. Welcome to Ascendant rank, Arthur. The world looks different from here." As our conversation continued, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. 3 months of intensive research and development, countless hours of theoretical work with my companions, the careful balance between advancement and restraint. All of it had culminated in capabilities that exceeded my most optimistic projections. "So what comes next?" Rachel asked eventually. "Stabilization and exploration," I replied. "I need to fully understand what the Nightingale method can accomplish, integrate these new capabilities with my existing responsibilities, and begin planning for the next phase of development." "Next phase?" Rose asked with curiosity. "Immortal rank," I said simply. "When I reach that level, I should complete both metamorphoses fully, achieving the full benefits of both body and mind transformation that traditional ascendants get separately. But that's a goal for the future. For now, I have enough new capabilities to master." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Cecilia warned with gentle humor. "You've achieved something unprecedented, but overconfidence has been the downfall of many promising ascendants." "She's right," Rachel agreed. "Even with your enhanced capabilities, there are immortal rank opponents who could still pose serious threats." "I understand the limitations," I assured them. "Enhanced regeneration, domain abilities, centuries of experience. Immortal rankers have advantages that I can't overcome yet. My partial metamorphoses give me unique versatility, but they don't make me invincible." The qualifier hung in the air, carrying implications that all 3 of them understood. I wasn't planning to remain at my current level indefinitely. "Just promise us you won't do anything reckless," Rose said with genuine concern. "I promise to be careful," I replied, which earned knowing looks from all 3 women. As the afternoon progressed, we discussed the practical implications of my advancement, the changes it would bring to our relationships and responsibilities, and the opportunities it created for future development. But perhaps most significantly, I was conscious of the companions whose own capabilities had been enhanced by my breakthrough. Luna's partial manifestation and Erebus's unleashed power represented force multipliers that would prove invaluable in the challenges ahead. The world had not become safer with my advancement. If anything, Achieving Ascendant rank had revealed the true scope of the threats that existed at higher levels of power. But for the first time, I felt genuinely prepared to face those challenges. The integrated approach I had pioneered wasn't just about personal advancement. It was about creating capabilities that could make a meaningful difference in a world that desperately needed them. The breakthrough was complete, but the real work was just beginning.